Three-headed dog, why are you so bad? Three-headed dog, why are you so bad? It was 10:30, the moon high and Hogwarts hushed. Ravenclaw Tower was utterly empty. Even its ghost, Helena, had gone to the other world, and Ravenclaw had been without a ghost ever since. Because ghosts were so rarely seen and Helena had always been reclusive, the younger Ravenclaws hadn't yet noticed her absence. Hermione eased her dormitory door shut and slipped down to the common room. Only a few braziers burned weakly. Moonlight slanted through the windows and made the room seem misty. The carpet underfoot and the ceiling studded with softly glowing stars and moons made it feel as if they were walking among the Milky Way. Maybe because she was about to do something important, Hermione felt a little nervous. "Hermione, over here," Ted whispered from the wall. She jumped. "You scared me to death," she hissed. "Are you a little scared?" Ted asked. She nodded. They were about to face you-know-who, after all. Ted squeezed her hand. "Don't worry. Nothing can happen to us at Hogwarts. And don't underestimate Dumbledore. He's the greatest wizard of our time. If he dared to bring the Philosopher's Stone back, he must have made thorough plans." "You mean Dumbledore knows?" Hermione asked, incredulous. "At least part of it," Ted said. "He hasn't moved yet for his reasons. We just need to act on our own ideas. That will already be helping him." Hermione was under an invisibility cloak Ted had cast, and he guided her by the hand toward the main tower. She didn't speak. She pondered his words. Though only 12, she was clever and had already begun to piece things together. Neville. It must be because of Neville. Because of that boy who'd faced you-know-who. Dumbledore's caution probably had something to do with him. And what about Ted? What was he planning? They crossed the stone bridge, climbed to the second floor of the main tower, then crept along the right-hand corridor on the third floor. The passage was silent. A single torch burned dimly several yards away. Squeak, squeak, squeak! Ted imitated a mouse from the corner of the wall with an illusionary sound. The effect came from a spirit spell, so it made no detectable magical fluctuations. The sound came from a corner far from them, so following it wouldn't give them away. After 2 or 3 seconds, another squeak, squeak, squeak sounded. Ted recognized that very particular mouse noise, Jerry's imitation. "Ted, is that you?" Harry's voice whispered. Ted dispelled the illusion, and he and Hermione stepped into the corridor. Harry, Ron, Neville, and Jerry poked their heads from under the invisibility cloak, too, 4 floating, disembodied heads. All 6 were a little excited, eager to begin. They arrived at the plain, iron-reinforced wooden door. Who would have guessed that behind it lay a 3-headed giant dog the size of a small truck, its head nearly brushing the ceiling when it rose? Harry frowned. "Didn't you bring a guitar?" "Cerberus needs to listen to music, didn't it?" Ted grinned. "My mouth's the instrument. Everyone, damn it, who's showing off? It's blinding." "Ready?" Harry asked, gripping the doorknob and looking at his friends. Everyone nodded. Harry flung the door open, teeth gritted, and charged in first. None of the 6 hesitated. They filed through the doorway, and Ted shut it behind them. Inside smelled of animals and dens. A giant dog lay asleep, 1.5 meters tall even while lying down. 2 heads were sprawled and snoring. The middle head was up, glaring ferociously at the intruders. No wonder Hagrid had used Cerberus to guard the door. This creature always kept at least 1 head awake. Who could sneak past it? Ted's appraisal ran automatically in his mind. Greek Cerberus, level 12. Attributes: Strength 25, Constitution 22, Agility 16, Intelligence 4, Perception 17, Spirit 8, Charm 4, Luck. Talents: Guardian Mythical Creature. Skills: Poison Fang level 3, Crush level 3, Howl level 3, Magic Resistance level 5, Poison Resistance level 5. Evaluation: A magical creature recorded in Greek myth with astonishing combat power. Level 12 is comparable to an Auror or Professor. The size of this Cerberus is enormous, strength about 5 times that of a person, constitution over 4 times, agility and perception over 3 times. It possesses guarding talents and mythical creature traits. Magic resistance L5 means it's effectively immune to most ordinary wizarding spells. It is also largely immune to poisons. Its saliva and teeth are inherently toxic. Dealing with this thing in a confined space without making a huge commotion would be difficult. No wonder a severely weakened Lord Voldemort was stumped and had to have Quirrell trick Hagrid into revealing information. "Quick! Quick, quick, hurry, go! Ron kept tugging at Ted, pale and tongue-tied. Ted snapped to it. Instead of breaking into song right away, he produced a handful of biscuits from his pocket and tossed them toward the sleeping dog. At once, all three heads stirred. Cerberus started up with a low, engine-like growl. The biscuits attracted it. The three heads crowded together, fighting over the treats. "What are those?" Hermione asked, surprised. "Hagrid's rock cakes," Ted said, shrugging. "I told you, these are perfect chew sticks. Look how greedily they're eating them." Ron looked incredulous. "You kept them?" Every time they visited Hagrid, they'd been given a pile of rock cakes, and Harry and Ron always threw them away. What a waste. "You young people don't know how to be economical. Make the most of things." He didn't explain further. Taking advantage of the dog's fixated attention, Ted cleared his throat and began to sing, quietly but clearly. Child, why are you so bad? Bullying, deceiving. Why do you do it? Learn to be a good child, love and cherish each other. Care is in the heart, full of color." Ted's own internal soundtrack accompanied him, ridiculous and melodramatic. The three dog heads, eyes softening as they munched, suddenly grew dazed at the song. Whether Ted sang remarkably well or the dog had a musical weakness, the effect was immediate. He hadn't finished half the song before the heads drooped and Cerberus collapsed into a deeper sleep. Ding, defeated Greek Cerberus, gained 210 experience. Perhaps the method of defeat was unusual. A level 12 creature yielding so little experience seemed odd. But that wasn't all. Ding, completed quest. The right corridor on the 3rd floor, green. Reward, 200 experience, random card. Ted remembered the unfinished quest. He must have needed to hypnotize Cerberus with music. He skimmed the 3 green-bordered cards that appeared in his mind. Card 1, Braveheart Meat, green. Item card, a consumable brewed from meat and herbs in the interstice. Increases physical attack by 10% for 10 minutes. Card 2, Fuma Shuriken. Item card, launches a rapidly spinning returnable Fuma Shuriken to attack enemies. Cooldown, 1 hour. Card 3, Forged Lucky Coin. Item card increases magic by 20% for 3 minutes. Cooldown, 8 hours. Note, reduced effect on targets with magic level 7 or higher. There wasn't time to debate. Ted chose the Forged Lucky Coin. As a wizard, a magic-boosting item was a safe bet. Ted's magic was already comparable to an adult's for most purposes, but in a long, intense fight, a short burst of extra power could make the difference. "Phew, oh my God," Jerry exhaled when Cerberus was fully asleep. His little heart had come close to exploding. Ron grabbed Neville by the shoulder. "Help me up, my legs are stiff." This behemoth could swallow 2 children in one bite. The breath from its bloody maw had made their hair flutter and left a stench that pressed on their chests. No wonder students stopped coming near this corridor after their first visit. While they recovered, Ted had produced a large glass jar and held it to one of the sleeping heads. The dog was drooling profusely. Ted caught the thick saliva in the jar. "Ted, what are you doing?" Hermione hissed. Ted waved a hand. "Have you read Greek mythology?" Orpheus played his lyre and made Cerberus fall asleep so he could enter the underworld and bring his wife back. In myth, wherever Cerberus's saliva falls, aconite grows. Aconite is a rare and valuable potion ingredient, very hard to come by. Ted's expression screamed, "Make money." He'd been a poor student for nearly a year, always spending and never earning. Today he saw a chance to recoup. "But those are just myths," Hermione protested. Ted was already filling a second jar. Not everything in myth is mere fiction. After the International Statute of Secrecy came into force in 1689, wizards hid from muggles, but before then there was a lot of contact. Many truths are preserved in myths. "Reading history makes one wise, classmates," Ted finished with a smug flourish. "Mushrooms for you. Mushrooms for you." At that moment, Hermione pointed. Beneath the 3-headed dog there was a harp. "Look, no time to waste. He's already gone down." Their hearts sank. They had hoped to reach the Philosopher's Stone before you-know-who, not run into him. "This way." Ron and Jerry had already worked together to open the trapdoor. Below was pitch black. They could see nothing. Lumos. Ted extended his wand, and a white ball of light blossomed at the tip, but it still couldn't reveal the depths. Then, with a casual flick, the light detached from his wand and drifted down on its own. "How can Lumos do that?" Hermione said in disbelief. The book had never mentioned it. Ted had modified Lumos using a D&D spell, Dancing Lights, changing its behavior. Now, his Lumos functioned like a dancing light charm. He'd even upgraded it to a more advanced level. "Never mind that, look down," Ron hissed. As the floating orb descended, everyone could see into the shaft. 4 or 5 meters below, thick and thin vines writhed and recoiled in the light like a writhing mass of snakes. Ted's skin prickled. "What in the world is that?" Jerry muttered, visibly shaken. Neville's face went serious. "It's Devil's Snare. Professor Sprout has been cultivating a special strain, bigger and more aggressive than usual." He glanced at the others. "Once we go down, don't move. The more you struggle, the tighter it'll wrap, and the more it'll try to strangle you. Stay still and they won't react much. Their weaknesses are fire and light." "Let me go first," Neville said, already bending toward the trapdoor. "Let me," Ted interrupted, and before anyone could argue, he shouted a string of spells. "Frost armor, Protego, shield." Then he put a levitation charm on himself, feet glued together, and stepped off the edge. He floated down onto the Devil's Snare and stood absolutely still, eyes sweeping the tangle. After a few seconds, he called back, "Come down, and remember, don't move." One by one, the others levitated down. The vines brushed them like a mass of living eels. Ted gave a slight twist of his wand. Incendio. A strong flame burst to life and lit the whole chamber. The underground space opened out into a huge cavern, 200 or 300 square meters in area, with carved stone walls and pillars, all smothered in damp, writhing Devil's Snare. The fire drove the vines back and made them retract. The thinner tendrils couldn't hold everyone and slithered aside, letting them drop the last few meters. "Careful. 5 meters. Don't twist an ankle," Ted warned, and immediately cast cushioning charms on himself and the others as they hit the floor. "Ugh, that was disgusting," Jerry said, hugging his arms. "I never want to touch that plant again. One vine almost reached my mouth." "Some of Professor Sprout's Devil's Snare strains are also very sound-sensitive," Neville added. "Don't make too much noise." "Why didn't you say so before?" Ron complained. They all peered into the cave. It looked almost natural, but after 2 traps in quick succession, they couldn't trust appearances. Hogwarts had a way of defying common sense. Ted suspected that after Devil's Snare, the next test would be something like flying keys, but it wasn't what awaited them. Ahead, the cave walls were speckled with faintly glowing moss that gave the place a dim, otherworldly light. At the far end stood a wooden door. Between them and the door stretched a field of mushrooms of every size, arranged in a patchy, staggered pattern. The edges of many caps gleamed gold, others were blotched with strange colors. The biggest mushrooms towered over them at more than 2 meters. The smallest were no larger than a fingertip. "These aren't normal mushrooms, are they?" Hermione said uncertainly. "If they're placed here, they're part of the test," Harry said. "Hagrid set the first challenge with Cerberus, Sprout the Devil's Snare. This is hers too." All eyes turned to Neville. "Puff shrooms?" he guessed, hesitant. "Puff shrooms?" Jerry asked. Neville shook his head. "I've only heard Professor Sprout mention them. She called them dangerous, exotic." Hermione and Ted exchanged looks. "I haven't seen them in any of my texts," Hermione admitted. "I have," Ted said. Hermione raised an eyebrow. He added, "Exotic Plants Compendium." "If you look closely," Ted went on, "you can see them tremble sometimes and shed a dust like powder. That's their spores. Breathe it in and you're in trouble." "What does it do?" Jerry asked. Ted shrugged. "Puff shrooms are a huge family. Different species have different effects." "For example?" Harry asked. "For example, inhaling some spores can make you feel like you're floating, lightheaded and disoriented." Ron's face lit up with a foolish grin. He liked a test of will. Ted quickly finished. "Or they could harden your lungs into woody fibers. That one's pretty nasty. Slow suffocation unless you have a high-level potion. It's not something you survive without serious help." Ron's smile froze. The others backed up a few cautious paces. The mushrooms weren't densely packed. There were winding paths between them. It would be possible to get through, but it would take time and extreme care. That was probably Sprout's intent, to slow down intruders. Ted, however, had a simple solution. He cast the bubblehead charm on everyone. Once their heads were sealed inside transparent astronaut helmets, their nerves eased, and they started forward with renewed confidence. "Ron, I'm moving. I'm moving." but his feet had a mind of their own. He tramped across the patch like a clumsy giant, accidentally stepping on mushroom caps left and right. He hit almost every single one. The others stared in stunned silence. Without Ted's charm, he might have ruined them all on his own. By the time they reached the door, Jerry was patting him on the back comfortingly. "It's okay. You did fine. Next time let me carry you, eh?" Ron tried to be nonchalant. He'd made a mess of Sprout's carefully tended collection, but no one said it aloud. Jerry couldn't resist muttering, "Ron, watch out! There's one! Great stomp! And there, too! Perfect aim!" Ted muttered a few Accio spells to pull any stray spore dust off their clothes. They didn't want to leave the mushroom field only to be poisoned later. Beyond the wooden door, the air felt heavy in a different way. The room inside didn't resemble the natural cave at all. It had been turned into a giant classroom. At first glance, the objects scattered around looked like stone funerary sculptures, horsemen, and figures carved in harsh, blocky styles. Ted thought briefly of McGonagall's chess pieces, but these were wrong. The faces were odd, the clothing abstract, the whole thing more like a parade of strange armored swordsmen and wizards. But the sculptures weren't the real focus. In the middle of the room, a 3-meter-wide magic circle had been etched into the floor in some pale powder. Circles, triangles, and runes interconnected, and a ring of small animal statuettes, only about 10 centimeters tall each, had been placed at intervals around the sigils. "This looks familiar," Neville murmured. Hermione's eyes brightened. "It's a magical lock, a puzzle enchantment on a secret door. You solve the pattern and it opens." They gathered around the circle, wary and exhausted but alert. The next test had begun. 83. Professor Flitwick and Professor McGonagall, please explain. Ted realized the animal statues and the magic symbols on the floor were very similar to the enchanted puzzles on the secret doors they'd solved before. At least they were the same sort of thing. "So we have to put those statues outside the circles into the blank spots on the circles?" Ron asked. Hermione studied the circle and slowly shook her head. "No, there's something wrong with the symbols in the circle." She looked at Ted. After 9 years of compulsory schooling and a bit of higher education, most of which he joked he'd already given back to his teachers, he still had more formal math training than these kids. Besides, his intelligence attribute was boosted. He could do rapid mental calculations now. On previous secret door puzzles, he'd handled the arithmetic. Ted cast arcane wisdom on himself, followed by Ravenclaw's wisdom, blue, to raise his intellect, and began counting on his fingers. After more than 10 seconds, he said, quietly, "There are definitely errors in the symbols on this circle. They're deliberate misdirections. If they simply converted the statues to the numbers they represented and filled them into the circle's blanks, they'd trigger a trap." As for what that trap would do, Ted glanced at the row of stone knights and the stone wizard a little further off. Those pieces weren't mere scenery, but who set up this checkpoint? How had Quirrell and you-know-who got through? The circle showed no sign of having been shattered or tampered with. Maybe Quirrell had found a way around it, or maybe Voldemort, weak as he seemed, knew how to bypass it. A half-dead legendary dark wizard was still a legend. Ted started working out the correct positions for the symbols and statues. He needed to deduce the formula the circle represented, then translate all the subsidiary symbols into numbers. It would take time. This was a time-consuming checkpoint. It hadn't stopped Voldemort, but it stopped them. Hermione circled the magic ring several times, fascinated. "This must be the ritual magic Professor Flitwick mentioned, right?" "What ritual magic? Why didn't Flitwick mention this to me?" Ron demanded. Hermione rolled her eyes. "If you paid attention in class, you would have." Harry chimed in. "Sirius mentioned something about ritual magic. There's an element of ritual magic in the protective spells at number 12, Grimmauld Place." Ted smiled inwardly. It helped to come from a magically rooted family. They pooled knowledge. He finished his mental calculation and whispered, "Okay, follow my instructions exactly when I tell you. Place the statues and shift the runes as I say. Keep your eyes on those things across from us. They're not just decorations." He picked up a loose stone, tapped it with his wand, and transformed it into an iron sword. He handed it to Neville. Neville accepted the single-handed sword. Having a sword in one hand and a wand in the other felt surprisingly natural. Put the bull at 2 o'clock in the second row, and simultaneously move the rune at 5 o'clock in the third row, one space to the left," Ted directed. As soon as he made the move, one of the opposite stone knights stirred. It lifted its stone sword planted in the ground and took a step forward. Heavy stone footsteps sounded like distant drums. "I'll handle this," Neville said. "Finish what you're doing, Ted." Neville fired an Expelliarmus at the stone knight, but it only shoved him back a step. The sword and knight were one piece, so it couldn't be disarmed. He followed up with a leglocker curse. The spell worked. The knight's legs froze, and it could only shuffle in place. Ted didn't waste the window Neville bought and corrected another symbol and statue. Another stone knight advanced, sword drawn. "Let me!" Ron jumped in, eager to make up for earlier embarrassment. He mimicked Neville's spells, leglocker curse, and when the knight could only shuffle, he added a skidding jinx. The knight, its legs stuck, skidded and fell hard on the polished floor, sending stone chips flying. With its legs immobilized, it couldn't get up, and was neutralized in one move. Ted kept going. Only a few symbols and statues remained. This time, 2 knights stepped out at once, and a stone wizard raised a stone wand and launched a pebble-like projectile. "Watch the wizard, Protego!" Ted threw up a shield, which deflected the flying stone. The wizard, though incapable of true spellwork, was still a ranged attacker. "Fire impact!" Ted shouted. A jet of flame burst from his other hand and staggered the stone wizard. He immediately followed with burning hands, spewing a cone of fire that roasted several stone statues. The stone wizard at the edge of the cone was badly scorched. "Frost Nova!" Ted ran toward the center of the formation and cast an ice ring. A blue ring of cold expanded outward, freezing the recently heated stone statues. The sudden temperature change caused thermal stress, expansion, and contraction, so the stone began to crack and shatter. "Blimey, cool!" Ron gaped. Ted grinned inwardly. He wasn't actually using raw brute force destructive magic. He'd combined thermal effects with targeted spells. Science and magic together made the impossible plausible. He placed the last statue in the final empty spot. The circle flared to life, and a surge of magic hummed outward. All the stone statues animated. Ted jumped. Whoever had set this checkpoint had rigged it to react to completion. The statues didn't attack. Instead, they spread out, raised their swords, crossed them, and formed a guarded passage. Everyone tightened their grip on their wands and slipped between the rows of stone guardians. Beyond them lay a second door and a vast chamber, almost like a stadium. The ceiling towered overhead, 10 meters or more. Ted was now certain the underground space wasn't natural. It had been magically extended and arranged, probably by several professors working to their own strengths. In the center of the room stood a giant chessboard. Ted's pulse quickened. This had McGonagall written all over it. Above the board, a swarm of dragonfly-like winged keys buzzed and darted. "Of course," Ron muttered. "We have to play chess." "And catch a key at the same time?" Jerry asked. "But which key's real?" Hermione wondered. Harry picked up a flying broom nearby and examined it. "Looks like some of us will play on the board, and some will have to grab keys." Ted added, "If I were designing this checkpoint, you'd probably have to do both at once." Hermione's brow knit. "But how did you know who'd get through?" "He was alone, wasn't he?" Because he was Voldemort, the professor's obstacles might not have been meant to stop him anyway. They were for testing the little witches and wizards who dared to try. Ted didn't want them to think too much about a legendary dark wizard. It would only sap morale. "Don't dwell on that. He's been in there a long time already," Ted said briskly. "Ron, you can handle the chess?" "Ha! Leave it to me. Wizard chess runs in my family for 3 generations. Ron thumped his chest theatrically. "I'll go after the keys," Ted said. He straddled the broom, pushed off the ground, and took to the air. Ted launched himself into the air and began to sweep back and forth, casting detect magic every 10 seconds to pick out the real flying key from the hundreds of lookalikes. Down on the ground, Ron was barking orders at his pieces. "Take your places," because the chessboard still had gaps to fill. Ted tore through the sky, skimming through the cloud of metal wings, eyes darting for anything different. Below, voices wailed. "Ron, it's coming for me," Harry shouted. "Don't worry, it can't reach you," Ron answered. "Ron, I'm about to die. Don't sacrifice me. I'm still useful," Jerry cried. "Let me go. Let me do it." Neville protested. How about I move 2 squares forward? Hermione offered. Quiet. Can you all just calm down for a second? My head's going to explode, Ron snapped. Talking chess pieces were probably a terrible idea. Then, a minute later, found it. After one detect magic, Ted saw a faint blue sheen on one key. Its wing was damaged, and the metal itself was a little different. That was the one. He pushed the broom harder and shot after it. The key sped up, trying to flee, but damaged wings can't outrun a broom. On the ground, the chess endgame had begun. The opponent's queen had advanced to the center. Ron leaned toward Jerry and whispered, "You'll be in command for the last moves. There are only 2 steps. Do this, then that." Jerry blinked, startled. "Okay, but what about you?" "Do you remember?" Ron demanded. "I remember," Jerry said uncertainly. Mounted on a stone knight, Ron raised his wand, looked up and around, and bellowed, "Now is Ron Weasley's shining moment! Advance! Checkmate!" Ron, playing the knight, charged forward, forcing the enemy queen to fling herself at him to capture and save the game. The queen swung the stone throne beneath her and smashed it down at the stone knight between Ron's legs. "Ron, X4." Ted had just grabbed the key when he heard Ron's triumphant shout. He cast a last-minute protego. "Shield charm," someone else cried. 2 defenses flared around Ron just as the stone chair hit the knight. With a thunderous crunch, the horse shattered into fragments, and Ron was hurled several meters, landing hard. "Ron," Jerry screamed, and ran, then froze. "Finish the game. Don't let Ron's sacrifice be in vain." Neville, red-faced with fury, gripped his wand like a sword and roared at the Stone Queen, looking fierce enough to be a young lion. Jerry, near tears, finished the 2 moves and, with Harry's help, surrounded and checkmated the enemy king. When the stone crown toppled, the game ended. By the time the dust settled, Ted had helped Ron to his feet. Ron trembled, not injured, just shaken. Debris and the memory of the chair swinging within inches of his face had been terrifying, but the protective spells had held. He was unharmed. Ron pouted, though. "I finally get to be a hero, and I don't even get a scratch. How am I supposed to brag about that?" Later, Ted learned Professor McGonagall had set this trial. She couldn't choose between Transfiguration chess and Quidditch with flying brooms, so she chose them both. The test required stealing a flying key and winning the enchanted chess game. When the chess match ended, a keyhole had appeared in the stone door set in the wall. Ted slid the key in, turned it, and the lock clicked open. He let go and the key flitted away. Harry started to step through the gap, but Ted stopped him and leaned over the opening. A stench hit him like a bucket of dirty water. He backed away fast, hand clapped over his nose. It smelled awful, familiar in a nauseating way. "Trolls," Ted said. "There might be trolls in there." "Trolls?" The others froze. "How could there be trolls here?" "They were here at Halloween. Not at that," Ted reminded them. They all nodded. Who could forget? They had only survived because of the bubblehead charm. Otherwise, they'd have been too sick to fight. "I think Quirrell was involved with the troll from before. Flitwick said it was one of Quirrell's research subjects." Ron's face ballooned. "Research subject? What is Professor Quirrell researching trolls for? Has a vampire sucked his brains out?" The rumor about the vampire in Africa, the garlic braid under Quirrell's turban, was common enough. Ted added, "I've had private conversations with Professor Quirrell. He used to teach Muggle studies, now Defense Against the Dark Arts, but his real expertise is magical creatures, bloodline modification, and breeding. Some of his directions, people don't accept." "Like what?" "Like genetically modified giant trolls." "So the troll we fought that Halloween was Quirrell's? Modified?" Jerry's eyes went wide. That would explain it. He moved quickly, casting shield charms and the bubblehead charm on the others, then slipping an invisibility cloak over each person. If his magic rating hadn't been Elv 6, with the +1 wand to help, he probably couldn't have sustained everything. Small charms took little power, combat protections ate far more. Since the first challenge, he'd already burned through a lot of his reserves. The stone door ground open, and the circular arena beyond was revealed. 3 massive creatures looked up, alarmed not by the door moving, but by no visible person entering. Quirrell's monsters were oddly distinct from one another. One was deep blue, skin smooth and glossy like a deep-sea fish with silvery and black banding. The second was yellow-green, its hide bumpy and warted, like an enormous toad. The third was dark brown, skin rough and facet-like, as if chiseled from stone. All stood over 2.5 meters tall, broad and thick, with heavy arms that hung past their knees, each clutching huge clubs. Their heads were not large. The fish one had a protruding mouth, the second an oval head, the third an irregular angular skull. And they were fat, very fat, neck and belly folded in 7 or 8 rolls, so that a slight movement made their fat ripple. Ted ran a quick appraisal. All 3 were level 7 trolls with level 2 modifications, modified giant trolls. He named them in his head: fish-skinned fat troll, crocodile-skinned fat troll, and salt-skinned fat troll. The fish-skin's talent was fish skin mucus, green, increasing magic resistance and sometimes deflecting spells or physical blows. The crocodile skin possessed proliferative thick skin, green, which drastically reduced physical damage. The salt-skinned was worst, salt skin green that reduced both magic and physical damage, and regeneration, blue, that let it recover fast, even regrow severed limbs. Quirrell had clearly made advances in bloodline modification. But why fatten them like pigs? Ted couldn't tell. The 3 modified trolls were formidable. If they rushed in, they might win, but only at the cost of every last spell. Their talents covered the old weak point, the back of a troll's head, and the usual trickery wouldn't be guaranteed anymore. Had Quirrell learned lessons? Damn him. He was getting better, and so were the villains. Invisible, the group couldn't see one another, so they held hands to avoid getting separated. Harry leaned close to Ted and hissed, "Look at their chests." Ted squinted. Each troll had a small metal pendant on its chest, and opposite the room, another door had 3 matching indentations. "Strange," Hermione muttered. "How did you know who get past this?" Ted thought of Quirrell, and of Voldemort possessing him. If Quirrell had the creatures under command, he wouldn't need to overcome them physically. The others couldn't fathom how Voldemort had bypassed such a test, but there was no time for that now. 3 of these fat, modified trolls were not going to be easy. 1 had been manageable through cunning, 2 would be risky, but perhaps doable by pinning one or trapping another. 3 was beyond their straightforward methods. From past fights, Ted knew that, aside from him, the others' magic barely dented such creatures. They could only use distractions. Only some of Ted's spells, Cutting Curse, Fire-Making Spell, and his own ice magic, could break through their defenses. Asking him to take on all 3 at once was ridiculous. If there'd been one, he could have brute forced it. 2 might have been handled with traps and coordination. 3, however, pushed everything past the edge of what they could reasonably hope to do. 85. 2 meets kill 3 monsters in accidents. I have a plan. Even before the voice finished, the others already knew who it belonged to. We'll steal the keys while they're asleep. Good idea. So who's gonna lull these 3 big babies to sleep? Everyone. They all watched Jerry shrug. Harry's plan sounded reckless at first, but after a moment of thought, Ted said, maybe Harry's idea could work. Do it like this. Ted lowered his voice and outlined the plan, including a backup if things went wrong. He wasn't fully sure he wanted to join the break-in, but he'd been preparing anyway. In particular, he'd been preparing potions. Because Harry was usually tasked by Snape with processing ingredients, special training, Ted had persuaded her, quietly or otherwise, to bring him a large number of mundane potion ingredients from Snape's stores. They were basic materials, nothing exotic or high-end, so Snape wouldn't complain. Harry was the only one who could pilfer from Snape's storeroom without drawing suspicion. Among the potions Ted had prepared was the Draught of Living Death. It was a powerful sleeping draught, centuries old in origin. The dosage had to be precise. Even a single drop too much could leave someone unconscious for 3 days. It induced a coma in which pulse and heartbeat slowed to a few beats per minute, making the drinker appear dead. That was how it got its name. Rumor had it Juliet in Shakespeare's play drank it, and the misunderstanding that followed caused that tragic outcome. Ted planned to lure the trolls with food. At first glance, the 3 looked like mutated fat pigs. Their size alone suggested how greedy they were. They would definitely take the bait. But there were a lot of variables. The draught's known dosage was for humans. Ted had no idea what the right dose would be for trolls. If the potion wasn't concentrated enough, even the whole vial might not be enough. Dividing that small bottle into 3 portions, did it have any chance of knocking out 3 pig trolls with high magic resistance, altered by Professor Quirrell? And there wasn't enough food. Even if Jerry's cheese and Ron's hidden chicken legs were retrieved, it would only be enough for 1 bite each for the trolls. In the end, Ted decided to split the potion into 2 doses. As the old saying went, 2 peaches killed 3 warriors. Now 3 monsters would fight over 2 portions. Let them fight. The 2 strongest would eat, and the weakest left behind would be taken care of by the group. That was the plan, but no one could be sure it would work. Would the 3 trolls squabble? Would the drought send them into a deep sleep, and for how long? If it failed, Ted's backup was to cover the rear, let the others go down first, then find a chance to escape and catch up. The 3 trolls were actually only 8 years old. Trolls grow extremely fast. They are usually abandoned by their mothers after a year and left to fend for themselves. These 3 had reached maturity at just 8. They'd been caught and studied by Professor Quirrell since they were 1 or 2 years old and had undergone over a dozen extensive experiments. Originally, there had been more than a dozen, but only these 3 successful specimens remained. Quirrell had focused on genetically modifying trolls years ago, though in the last 2 years he'd paid them little attention. Lord Voldemort was back, and Quirrell's earlier research had become taboo. Still, these 3 were mature, powerful subjects, and Quirrell kept them. Dumbledore's professors had arranged for checkpoints and housing, so the trolls had been stuck in this place for over half a year. Food and shelter weren't bad for trolls. Today, however, something unexpected happened. Their master had rushed in, passed through a wall, and vanished, and the door had opened by itself. The trolls didn't think of running. Who would feed them if they fled? But the smell of food drifted through the air. The 3 trolls twitched their noses. Ahead, about 20 meters away, 1 portion to the left, 1 to the right, there was food. The scent was irresistible. Their bodies moved before their brains could catch up. 3 trolls and 2 portions of food made for a poor division. 2 of them lunged for the same pile, and a fight broke out. The crocodile-like troll, covered in bumps, lashed out for the food, but was already being shoved by the fish-like troll crowding it. The fish troll was knocked off balance, fell back 2 body lengths, then clutched the crocodile troll's leg to pull it down. The 2 rolled and tumbled into a ball, each trying to reach the food while stopping the other. Raw, punch-for-punch fighting, clanging and thundering, fiercer than any octagonal ring. The sound of fists hitting faces was a constant smack. On the other side, the salt-crusted ogre had no competition and had already stuffed its portion inside. It ate with animal greed, like Pigsy gobbling a ginseng fruit, swallowing whole without tasting. It was the biggest and strongest of the 3, a circle bigger than the others, its body encased in a crust of salt that made it nearly stone-hard. In past scuffles, it had been the clear powerhouse. Once it finished, the salt ogre turned its attention to the other pile, just in time for the other 2 to grab whatever they could and shove it in. "Oh no," Hermione whispered. They'd each eaten a portion. Ted tried to steady her. "Now we just have to wait and see the effect." Even Ted wasn't sure. Given the troll's size and natural magic resistance, it was impossible to predict the drought's effect. Wild trolls ate anything. Their digestive and resistant systems were formidable. The 3 fought until all the food was gone. With nothing left to fight over, they calmed and lay down. The salt-crusted ogre's eyelids drooped, and soon after, its snores rolled out like a tractor engine. The other 2 felt drowsy too, still fighting to stay awake, their eyes rolling, but growing weaker. "There's no other choice. We go now," Ted said. "Harry, Jerry, and I will each move to our targets. Everyone else, be ready. If the trolls wake, use restraining spells like levitation, but remember, don't bother trying direct offensive charms on them. They won't do much." Ted let go of his companion's hands and started toward the crocodile troll. Though unseen by one another, he, Jerry, and Harry were all tiptoeing forward. Because of his nature, Jerry moved nearly silently, light and quick, and he was the first to reach his target, the fish-like troll. Even with a bubblehead charm over his head to block the smell, he grimaced at the slime. Embedded on the fish troll's chest was a palm-sized flat metal component, part of the key. Jerry adjusted himself, leaned in, and carefully picked it up. Ted's target, the crocodile troll, was half asleep, its face twitching, limbs restless, dangerous if it woke. He got close and used a levitation charm on the key component on its person. It worked. Quirrell hadn't tampered with the key. Ted then cast a cutting curse on the rope holding the component, silently severed it, and guided the piece to his hand. Harry's target was the salt-crusted ogre, the soundest sleeper of the three. Its salt-crusted skin was harder than stone, rough and rigid. Its snores rolled like thunder even at a distance. Neville and Ron weren't as nimble as Harry, which was why she volunteered for the risk. She quietly cut the rope, stood on her toes, and reached, but still couldn't touch. So she slipped her wand into the hollow of the key component and hooked it. Ted seized his piece and began to retreat. Jerry had already withdrawn with his. Harry was still working on her piece when the crocodile troll behind Ted suddenly opened its eyes. A transparent, nictitating membrane slid across its eyeball, and it let out a furious roar that burst through the chamber. 86. 3 kills. Professor Quirrell had thought he was only modifying a troll when he spliced in blood from an otherworldly reptilian magical beast. The alteration had produced a harmless mutation, a transparent nictitating membrane over the creature's eyes. Quirrell assumed it was for waterproofing and wind resistance and didn't think much of it. In fact, that membrane allowed the monster crocodile to perceive the color of magic. When a spell was cast nearby, it left a blue shimmer across the eyelid. Quirrell never noticed because the creature had been raised around him and had gotten used to his magic. The crocodile barely reacted to spellwork and usually just lay there. It didn't take to Ted's double stealth and consecutive spellcasts so well. When Ted went invisible and cast 2 spells in succession to grab the key components, the continuous blue glow registered in the croc's eyes and woke it from a light doze. It looked up, saw a small humanoid blue light hovering in front of it, and roared without hesitation. The roar snapped the other trolls awake too. The monster fish, which had just nodded off, popped up immediately, and even the salt-baked ogre's eyelids twitched. Ted knew in an instant that things had gone wrong. He did a forward roll just as a heavy club slammed down where he'd been standing. Stone cracked and debris sprayed like bullets. He checked his hand and wand and saw, with a stab of panic, that he had become visible. The violent roll had ruined his invisibility cloak. 2 key components were still floating in midair. Harry and the others had managed to grab them. "You go! I'll hold them off!" Ted tossed the key he had, flicked his wand, and coated his feet with a greased soul's charm. He slid 2 meters to the side as the croc's club swept past. The club's tip was as thick as a bucket. When it cut through the air, it made a whooshing roar like a small car. A direct hit from that would have shattered at least half his bones. "Stunning spell!" Harry shouted at the croc, but the creature only thrashed and shrugged the spell off, unaffected. "Slippery surface," Hermione called, and this time the charm took. The croc tried to swing its club to chase Ted, but its feet slipped. It fell backward with a huge crash, the club flying from its grasp. Their own spells, however, had broken their invisibility too. "Neville, grab the club," Neville shouted. He levitated the croc's club and set it to float back, ready to smite the croc with its own weapon. The monster fish shook itself like a wet dog and began to move as well, groggy from sleep and confused. Ted wasn't done. "You go! I'll hold them off!" he yelled again, then flicked his wand, casting a greasy charm across the floor. The monster fish slipped on the new oil and went down hard, sliding 5 or 6 meters, slime and grease covering its body. Jerry had already assembled the 3 key pieces and was starting to fit them into the stone door. Neville, dual-wielding a sword Ted had transfigured into one hand and a wand in the other, moved to hold the croc in place as it staggered to its feet. "Sorry, Ted. We have to stop you-know-who, but I won't abandon my friends," he said, voice steady. Hermione improvised a conjuring transfiguration spell she'd taught herself and sent a squawking flock of small birds circling the croc's head. The birds kept it waving its huge hands, trying to shoo them away. The salt-baked ogre, who had the highest magic resistance among the 3, was coming to slower than the others. It had drunk half a bottle of life-and-death water and hadn't slipped into a completely death-like sleep. Now it was propping itself up and rolling on the ground, round. muscles sluggish and uncooperative. Ted barked, "Retreat to the door, move." Jerry yanked the stone door open. "Get in!" Ted fell back to the very edge of the doorway and, ignoring his own drained reserves, spread 4 or 5 more greasy charms in quick succession, covering the floor. He even greased the ground beneath his own feet. If you had to skate, you might as well do it well. The others, Hermione at the front, then Jerry, Ron, Harry, and Neville, slid through on the slick floor. Ron, nerves getting the better of him, tripped at the threshold and went sprawling. Outside, the 3 trolls were helpless on the grease. They kept flailing, slipping, and falling with thunderous thuds. Ted stood in the doorway and watched them struggling. Could slamming the door end it? He set his jaw. If he was going to do something drastic, now was the time. He held his wand in one hand and traced a complex series of gestures around it with the other for 6 full seconds. Fire bloomed at the tip of the wand, and in 2 more seconds swelled into a fast spiraling fireball larger than a human head. He flicked it out, and with the other hand, slammed the stone door shut. The muffled explosion rocked the corridor. The ground trembled. His companions nearly fell over at the blast. "Did you just blow up the school?" Ron blurted. Harry rolled his eyes. "What are you on about? That little explosion isn't going to level Hogwarts." "Do you think that will alert the professors?" Hermione asked. Jerry grinned. "Wouldn't that be perfect?" Inside the small stone room beyond the purple-flamed door they'd just closed, a table held bottles of many sizes. From beyond the wall came the sound of roaring and crackling, like a building being torn apart. A few seconds later, Ted's system pinged. "Ding, you killed the monster fish, plus 750 XP. Ding, you killed the monster crocodile, plus 800 XP. Ding, you killed the salt-baked ogre, plus 950 XP, triple kill. They'd been burned alive." The series of greasy charms had done more than make the trolls helpless. They had laid out a ring of fuel. Ted's fireball had enough explosive punch and had ignited the grease. The frantic noises outside had been the trolls thrashing in a spreading blaze until they were little more than smoking, charred remains. Ted let out a long breath. His plan had worked. He stepped through the door again, his shoes sizzling on still-hot flagstones, and confirmed the 3 smoking hulks were dead. The heat was intense, hot enough to fry an egg in minutes. He grabbed the 3 cards from where they had floated and hustled back inside, shutting the door behind him. "The trolls are dead. We're safe to retreat," he said. Ron let out a laugh that was half relief and half exhilaration. 3 trolls and the 6 of us, too strong. The others clustered around the table. Hermione had already unfurled a parchment and was muttering to herself. "It's a logic puzzle. I've seen similar things in Muggle newspapers." She examined the 7 bottles on the table. "Of these 7, only one is the potion that will let us pass the flame door. The others are 4 bottles of nettle wine and 2 bottles of poison. Mathematically." "Got it." Hermione plucked the second bottle from the left. It was tiny, no more than a thimbleful. "This fits the clues." "Is that all?" Harry asked. Everyone exchanged glances. The vial was barely enough for a sip. Ron, nursing his twisted ankle from the fall, shifted against the wall and watched anxiously. "Do you think you know who hasn't arrived here yet? Maybe we can just hold this place," Jerry said. "Professors should be on their way," Harry added, uneasily hopeful. Neville, however, took the small bottle from Hermione's hand without hesitation. "They say I'm lucky," he said, voice quiet but resolute. "Maybe it's my turn to be brave." "Neville," Harry started, but Neville had already uncorked the tiny bottle and tipped it back, swallowing the potion in one long gulp. 87. Face Quirrell. "You all go find the professors. Quick! I'll hold 'em off," Neville shouted, closing his eyes, gritting his teeth, and charging straight into the purple flames. He had already decided, even if it cost him his life, he would stop Lord Voldemort. Maybe this was his destiny. In a blink, the flames parted around him, and he was gone. The purple fire snapped closed behind him, blocking the entrance again. Harry and the others stood frozen. Jerry reached out, trying to grab Neville, but he had already vanished into the blaze. "What do we do?" "Neville will die," Ron's voice broke. At last they all felt the weight of the situation. Hermione's face drained of color. "We can't just—" "Don't worry," Ted said, digging a small bottle of red potion from his pocket. He uncorked it and downed it in one gulp. "Ted, what are you doing?" Hermione cried, grabbing his arm, afraid he would follow Neville into the fire. I'm going to try to help him, Ted said, and began to cast on himself. Shield spell, mage armor, frost armor, protego, heedless of anything else, he layered defenses. Most important was an energy shield he had developed himself, a ward that combined the D&D principle of resisting energy with Azerothian ideas of magic suppression. It couldn't stop blunt physical trauma, but it could absorb and dull elemental attacks, fire, frost, lightning, exactly what a purple flame might use. This was the first spell Ted had truly created on his own. He'd earned nearly 300 experience points when he did it. The red vial he'd just swallowed was a fire protection potion, temporary but potent. Between the shields and the potion, he now had 6 layers of protection: shield, mage armor, frost armor, protego, fire resistance, level 3, and energy absorption, level 2. He hoped it would be enough to get him through whatever Snape had set up. The purple fire, Ted reasoned, had been meant for anyone really after the Philosopher's Stone. It wouldn't be gentle, but Snape, given Dumbledore's intent, would hardly design a barrier guaranteed to kill intruders outright. Up to now, the only checkpoint that had been truly lethal had been Quirrell's 3 trolls. The rest had held back. This purple flame might teach him a harsh lesson, even hospitalize him, but it shouldn't be a death sentence. Besides, he'd smelled the poisons on the table earlier. Nasty, but not instant killers. And Dumbledore wouldn't just watch someone burn to ashes. Wait, take this. Harry handed Ted a small pouch. You all go get the professors. I'll go after Neville. Ted took the pouch, pried Hermione's hand off his arm, and without waiting for any protests, plunged into the purple fire. The flames hit him and 3 of his wards flared and cracked in an instant. For a terrifying second, the magic screamed as it was consumed. Energy absorption and the fire resistance potion did their work, though, and he staggered out the other side. The passage beyond the fire lay quiet. Ted was breathing hard. The short sprint through the flame had eaten 30% of his magic in 2 seconds. His reserves, already less than half, were nearly exhausted. He produced a blue potion and drank it while he took in the scene. His sudden arrival startled the 2 people already there, Professor Quirrell and Neville. Quirrell had just used Expelliarmus to fling Neville's sword and wand out of his hands. Now Ted stumbled out and guzzled the potion. Ha, Ted! Quirrell's voice was odd, a twitching curl in his mouth. Ted had never heard during lessons or office hours. There was a strange, tremulous emotion in it. Ted, how did you get in? Neville blurted. Quick, leave! Professor Quirrell's trying to steal the stone. Ted ducked behind a stone pillar, the moment a spell from Quirrell shattered rock where he'd been standing. Neville lunged at the professor, with nothing but his bare hands. Bravery without weapons. Petrificus totalis! Quirrell flicked his wand, and Neville collapsed as if turned to stone. Neville! Ted called, fearing Quirrell would do worse. He stepped out from behind the pillar to draw Quirrell's attention. Professor Quirrell, it was you all along. Quirrell's reply was triumph and malice. Of course it was. Who did you think? Snape? He spat the name like a scent he found offensive. He's insufferable, a dreary old bat, not fit for this sort of work. There was a cold viciousness to Quirrell's voice, an irritation that made him look taller and more certain than the Quirrell Ted had known in class. You never suspected me, Longbottom, but you, Ted, surely you noticed something. For the last month you've avoided private meetings. You even made excuses not to come to my office. Ted answered from behind the pillar, forcing lightness into his voice. Are you saying I avoided you because of your research? Ever since someone in the Forbidden Forest started drinking unicorn blood, I stopped meeting with you alone. Humph, clever of you, Quirrell sneered. Suspicious of my work because of a little rumor. How predictable. Foolish, really. The Master values you. What a pity that someone so dull would be wasted on such suspicion. Values me. The words hit Ted with a cold clarity. Voldemort, the name that clung to Quirrell like a parasite, thought Ted a promising dark magic talent to be cultivated. No wonder Quirrell had been bitter. He'd paid a terrible price to seek out Lord Voldemort, to go into Albanian forests and learn what he had, and now he was little more than a vessel. And yet the Master, Tom Riddle, was already turning his attention to Ted, wanting to use his talents. That was a humiliation Quirrell could not forgive. It made sense then. Quirrell had tried to control Ted with Imperio in the last fortnight to force him into mischief and draw attention. Ted had been on his guard and refused to give Quirrell any openings. That must have enraged the professor. How could Quirrell be so cunning and so blinded by jealousy? Quirrell's face twitched with something like a smile. "You should have come back to me, Ted. The master has plans for those with talent. You would have been served." Ted's mouth went dry. The blue potion warmed the edges of his mind, but his magic reserves were still dangerously low. Quirrell held his wand with the air of someone who believed the moment already his. Neville lay crumpled where he had fallen, frozen and helpless. For a moment, there was only the scrape of stone and the faint hiss of the extinguished purple flames. Then Quirrell laughed, soft and ugly, like someone savoring his victory. "Thanks to reader Worrialt City for the 500 reward." Ted feigned politeness, standing behind a stone pillar while making complicated casting gestures with his hands. It was a trick he'd learned from his research, gestures instead of spoken incantations. He was already halfway through a silent levitation charm combined with a movement charm, planning to make Neville's dropped sword fly up and stab Quirrell from behind, when Quirrell suddenly spun, chanting, "Protego, finite incantatum." A one-handed floating sword that had been sneaking up behind him was knocked away. Quirrell's eyes glittered with a nasty, green-eyed envy. "Humph, Ted, you can already cast a levitation charm together with a movement charm silently?" he snapped. Genius like Quirrell understood the gap between himself and true prodigies more clearly than anyone. That awareness bred despair, and despair had driven him to choose the dark path, an allegiance to Lord Voldemort over dignity. A hoarse, unpleasant voice rasped from the back of Quirrell's head like dry wood scraping stone. "Very talented, Ted Epiphany. You would be wasted at Hogwarts." Quirrell's face twitched. An impossible mix of fear, remorse, and jealousy flickered across it. He reached up and untied the purple turban that had covered his head for a year. Pushing the cloth back revealed a gray, cement-like face fused to the back of Quirrell's skull, grotesquely out of proportion. No nose at all. "Ted," the voice said flatly from that gray face, "Dumbledore would be especially wary of a muggle born like you, with humble origins and uncommon talent. He will watch you closely. You would be ostracized here." There was a poisoned generosity to it. "Come with me. I will teach you to use your rare talent, to wield power, to bend mediocrity to your will. You will share in my glory." Quirrell's expression went soft with longing. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man receiving promises he'd always wanted. Ted, however, felt nothing but suspicion. His mental defenses were at level 3. Phrases like those could sway ordinary minds, but not him. Still, he played along to buy time. "Oh, so you're you-know-who? I've heard of you," he said, keeping his tone light. A voice from the back of Quirrell's head swelled with pride. "Yes, I am Lord Voldemort, the greatest dark wizard, the immortal." Then Ted jabbed at him. "But you don't look so great. And Professor Quirrell doesn't seem to have gained anything either. I hear he was forced to drink unicorn blood. Terrible curses follow that." Ted's words hit Quirrell like a hot iron. He had, in truth, drunk unicorn blood. It had bound him in ways that left him ruined. His whole body trembled. "It's over," his face said in panic. Lord Voldemort's voice faltered, then laughed, desperate and loud. "Ha, Ted, you do not disappoint. You possess something like me. Come with me. I can teach you power." If Voldemort's tone sounded persuasive, it was only because he had once been a master of legilimency and could read the hints of will in others. He recognized in Ted a strange force, something that reminded him of his own past. Ted realized that, too, and knew he had to put distance between himself and any suggestion of affinity with Voldemort. If Dumbledore was watching, any resemblance could be ruinous. "Bullshit. We are not the same," Ted snapped, and then, faster than Quirrell expected, he played 4 cards in a row. Boar Firecracker, Chasing Snowball, Dragon Firework. With a loud bang, a plump, bristling boar burst into being from the void, teeth bared, charging straight for Quirrell. A fist-sized snowball smeared itself across the gray face at the back of Quirrell's skull. Then a 5 or 6 meter dragon made of sparks and fireworks, scales of light, claws of flame, roared into existence and lunged at Quirrell. None of it could truly harm a wizard like Quirrell, but the display was disruptive. Quirrell waved his hand, muttered, "Defindo," and the boar exploded into a shower of harmless sparks. The snowball was stopped by a shield charm. For a heartbeat, Voldemort's voice was sharp and annoyed. "You again? Why do I say again?" He never finished the thought. Quirrell tried to dispel the dragon with finite incantatum, but he miscalculated. The dragon swelled instead and dove at him, folding its mouth around Quirrell as if to swallow him whole. Sparks poured out in a riotous, crackling burst like a sudden fireworks show. For an instant, the spectacle hid everything. "Idiot!" Voldemort snarled from the back of Quirrell's head, but then, with cold efficiency, he cast the spell itself, could not conjure in ordinary circumstances. All spells end. Even while using Quirrell's body, Voldemort could still call on spells that would normally require many wizards. The dragon vaporized in an instant. Quirrell's robes remained, torn and riddled with holes, singed into something that looked like a net. For the first time in his life, Quirrell's shabby robes looked almost alluring in their ruin. But the effort cost him. Quirrell's body shook, 3 small tremors in quick succession. He'd been possessed for months, his vitality was fraying. Carrying Voldemort, fighting, and forcing advanced magic through a drained body left him spent. Cold droplets began to patter onto Quirrell's bald scalp, running down both his face and the dead face plastered to the back of his head. Those first 3 displays had been diversionary, feints. Ted still had one last card. He drew it. Neville's failed scab potion. A high, keen scream ripped through the air. 2 screams tore through the chamber at once, one in front and one behind his head, the kind of piercing cry that makes your skin crawl. Professor Quirrell was doubled over, trembling from head to toe. His hands splayed like chicken feet, veins standing out, held protectively over his face. He wanted to touch it, but didn't dare. He could only howl and endure the pain. The thing on the back of his head sounded even worse. Lord Voldemort had nothing resembling hands and could only wail, contorting his face in misery. Then, almost as if erupting, Quirrell's still rounded head broke out in large, angry sores, bright, vivid, volcano-red bumps, layered and of all sizes. Although Neville's failed scabies potion, green, was only a green quality card, it was a one-time item, and its effect was devastating. Even Lord Voldemort was affected. On the Dark Lord's noseless visage, from forehead to chin, 20 or 30 red pustules had sprouted in a continuous patch. Around where his nose should have been, several large bumps clustered together, making him look like he had a red clown nose. Is he Buggy the Clown now? The man whose face fruit ability once commanded respect from everyone was reduced to this. "Ah, damn it! Damn you!" Voldemort howled. He didn't appear to feel that much pain himself. Mostly he was sharing Quirrell's suffering, but he could sever the connection at will, so the discomfort was only temporary. What stung far more was the humiliation. Once he had been feared and obeyed, now he was disfigured, his dignity assaulted by a face full of pustules. Memories of his weak years, hiding in damp Albanian forests and only able to possess small animals, flared up. This humiliation reopened old wounds. He could not accept it. Voldemort stopped caring about subtlety or Quirrell's well-being. He seized control of Quirrell's body and, without finishing the word, spat a green light from the man's mouth. Avada Kedavra. The way he released it showed the terrifying mastery of a killing curse wielded by someone beyond ordinary skill. If Ted had been strong enough to appraise, he would have seen that Voldemort's Avada Kedavra was already at level 9. One more step, and he would have forged his own path of slaughter. The green bolt slammed into the stone pillar where Ted was hiding. Although non-destructive in intent, it tore off a head-sized chunk of masonry and sent cracks spidering through the pillar. The whole column rocked. The spell had consumed a tremendous amount of magic. Quirrell's face went ashen in an instant, and deep lines creased the corners of his eyes. It was obvious. Using Quirrell as a conduit like this was draining the host's life force. That display of force didn't achieve the effect Voldemort wanted. The boy was hiding too well. Single-target attacks would be hard to land. So the Dark Lord changed tactics. With Quirrell's body bent into a grotesque, back-arched posture, his head turned so the face at the back looked like a warped front, Voldemort cast another spell. Fiendfire. Flames burst into being, and the underground chamber filled with a sickly red-orange glow. Dumbledore's final barrier had been set in a vast circular cavity, sloping up like a tiered lecture hall. The Mirror of Erised sat in the lowest point, ringed by a circle of stout, 1-meter diameter stone pillars. Now a viscous orange-red fire rolled through that ring like a living thing, flickering, twitching, and spreading. It flowed and crept, as if it were a creature intent on devouring everything. It was not the true fiendfire curse, but a dark flame Voldemort had developed early on by modifying Incendio. He had done so precisely to gain stronger control before attempting the fiendfire proper. Fiendfire itself is terrifyingly hard to master. Any summoned blaze behaves like a predator, devouring combustibles to grow stronger, forming fiery beasts, and sometimes even burning stone. Normal counterspells and water are useless against it. Many practitioners have died trying to control it. Grindelwald once almost reduced Paris to ashes with a variant. Voldemort's modified spell gave him the viciousness of Fiendfire with far more control, and it was the right choice here. The true Fiendfire might have torn free if Quirrell's body broke down, consuming the stone and everything else. The ring of flame spread inward, contracting slowly. Ted's preparations for Snape's purple flamegate had not yet worn off, and the first wave washed over him without turning him into a torch. But he could no longer shelter behind a pillar. They were catching fire one by one. He rolled clear from behind a smoking column and stood fully exposed, soot rising from his clothes. Ted watched Voldemort closely, every fiber of his attention trained on the Dark Lord. He activated the cards, Restore Stamina, and forged Lucky Coin. Warmth and vigor flowed into his exhausted body. His stamina surged and his magic reservoir refilled. He flicked his wand, casting a shield charm and then mage armor on himself, sweat beading on his forehead. This was Lord Voldemort, a mass murderer, a sorcerer of terrifying ability. One wrong move now might be fatal. Voldemort, however, did not continue with a barrage of attacks. He kept his body in that absurd arching posture, the back of his head presenting the face now contorted with rage. He tilted his head and murmured an unfamiliar magic. He had noticed mage armor, Voldemort's command of spells and the dark arts, arguably surpassing even Dumbledore's in some respects. Let him see the essential difference in how mage armor was constructed. Its concept and foundation did not fit his familiar magical system. He had recognized something new. You truly are a genius, Ted. I'll give you one last chance. Don't test my patience. Lord Voldemort's voice, low and unpleasant, echoed through the room. He had ruled without mercy for years. He had never given anyone a second chance. Ted could not surrender. There was no future under this crippled Dark Lord, and Dumbledore might be watching nearby. He forced a smile, trying not to look too shaken. As expected of the Dark Lord, your moves are grand, Ted said. But you don't actually think your plan is flawless, do you? If you ask me, Ted added, grinning, Professor Quirrell already regretted it after term started. He sought help from Dumbledore, around Halloween. How convenient that a troll showed up then. Quirrell's performance was absurdly theatrical. You must have been signaling Dumbledore for help. No, I didn't. Master, don't believe him. How could I betray you? My life belongs to Master. Woo, woo. Quirrell's voice dissolved into uncontrollable sobs. He managed only to keep his face composed. The rest of him was falling apart. He could feel his life force draining. He knew he was going to die. Soon. Voldemort's expression was inscrutable, but his suspicion was obvious. Quirrell's behavior had been odd, exaggerated. Dumbledore knew Quirrell. A sudden, extreme change like that would surely attract attention. For a moment, Voldemort said nothing. The body he occupied could not last much longer, and time was short. He cut through the silence. Stop beating around the bush. Make your choice. Ted seemed to accept. There was no more delay. Quirrell's abnormal behavior, the unicorn blood in the Forbidden Forest, you don't really think Dumbledore was unaware, do you? From the moment you began breaking through the protections until now, it's been over an hour. Dumbledore must have noticed. How much time do you have left? Voldemort's face remained controlled, but his voice turned cold and murderous. So you refuse my generous offer? Ted was already gone. He had thrown on the invisibility cloak. Hominum revelio, Voldemort snapped, swinging his wand. A ripple of magical light spread through the chamber as he searched for any human presence. The sensation of detection was strange and scrambled. Something unfamiliar interfered, and Ted's figure did not appear. He had never seen that kind of magic. Apparicium, Revelio, point me. Voldemort barked 3 more spells, each a desperate attempt to force Ted's presence into view. Still nothing. The strain proved too much for the body. Quirrell, though still the vessel for Voldemort's will, could hold on no longer. He fell to his knees with a keening wail. "Ah, master, master, spare me! I'm going to die! I can't hold on!" Quirrell's body collapsed into something pitiable, thin, limp, a sodden wreck of snot and tears. He crawled helplessly on the floor, an utter ruin. Voldemort's hatred flared, not only for Ted, but for Quirrell's uselessness and for the humiliating state he himself had been reduced to. He, the Dark Lord, propped on shaking hands, could barely straighten his back. The realization burned through him. He had been forced to inhabit such a wretched corpse. The thought filled him with loathing, but spite and self-pity would not save him. He had endured worse in the forests of Albania. He could endure this too. There was no time for tantrums. The only thing that mattered was the Philosopher's Stone. With that stone he could restore himself, renew his flesh, his power, his authority, and all of this debasement would end. He forced himself to focus. The stone would be his, whatever it took. Chapter 91. Professor Quirrell is broken. Lord Voldemort was anxious now. The boy, Ted, had been right. Dumbledore, that old immortal, had probably noticed. He had to get the Philosopher's Stone and leave, and fast. "Quirrell, pull yourself together. Get Longbottom to look in the mirror. The stone is in the mirror. Hurry." Voldemort growled through Quirrell's teeth. Quirrell, however, was utterly demoralized. He didn't move. Voldemort alone could no longer control this crumbling body. "Get up! Hurry, you useless heap! Move yourself!" Voldemort's tone was merciless now, treating Quirrell as if he were disposable, nothing like the way he had kept the professor alive in the Albanian woods. Quirrell had already given up. If he had to die, he might as well save the rest of his strength. But Voldemort roared, forcing his face to strain against the back of Quirrell's skull. The skin where they met seemed to tear, flesh splitting as the two identities fought. "Ah! No! Master, I'll move! I'll move!" The sharp, agonized lash of pain drove Quirrell to his feet. He couldn't simply lie down and await death. With a trembling hand, the old, snot-streaked professor staggered to Neville and grabbed the back of the boy's neck. "Get up. Look in the mirror," Quirrell croaked, sounding weak and uncertain, as if his bones had already given out. He truly believed he was finished. He felt Voldemort's impatience like a cold hand. He was a mixture of fear and regret. He had to squeeze whatever last usefulness he had out of himself. Neville, almost paralyzed, could only stare into the mirror of Erised with wide, terrified eyes. "Don't let the stone appear. Don't let Voldemort get it." Neville screamed inside himself, but fear has a way of making nightmares come true. Instead of his parents, the mirror showed him himself. The Neville in the mirror smiled, held an odd red crystal, slipped it into his right pocket, patted the pocket, and winked. Neville's right pocket suddenly felt heavy, as if something had been placed there. No. Just as Voldemort had predicted, the Philosopher's Stone was hidden in the mirror of Erised, and Dumbledore had enchanted it so that only someone who wished to protect the stone, not use it, could take it from the mirror. It was a clever safeguard. The mirror searches a person's deepest desire. Ordinary spells can't fool it. Anyone who wanted the stone for themselves would never pull it out. Ted could not get it from the mirror. Voldemort had realized that, which was why he didn't kill Neville. He meant to use Neville to fetch the stone. Ted, who had been hiding, had already gulped down a bottle of the mana potion he'd brewed, blue, delicious, restoring his magic. It had taken him 4 attempts and nearly all of the ingredients he'd borrowed from Snape with Harry and Hermione's help, but with Hermione he'd managed to make just 3 bottles. Quirrell, hands trembling, clutched Neville's neck and weeping, demanded in a choked voice, "Tell me, where is the Philosopher's Stone?" "There's nothing. No stone," Neville protested uselessly. "Tell me. Speak." Quirrell felt life draining away. His mind was on the edge of collapse. "No, I didn't see it. Give up. I just saw myself winning the House Cup for Gryffindor." Neville lied, stubbornly, as if any lie could save him. Voldemort, a master of legilimency, heard the lie in the tone alone. "He's lying," Voldemort said. Let me face him." Quirrell turned, exposing the back of his head. Neville saw Voldemort's face for the first time. Not a human face, but a shriveled, noseless leather mask plastered to Quirrell's scalp. This was the enemy who had destroyed his parents. Neville stared in horror, but to Voldemort, his mind was an open book. In his pocket, right pocket. The stone is in his right pocket, Voldemort cried triumphantly. No, it's not, Neville insisted, but he could not move. Voldemort reached with a cold, controlled hand toward Neville's right pocket. From his hiding place, invisible and frantic, Ted watched and feared Voldemort would seize the stone and flee. Dumbledore, where were you? Ted shouted, unable to keep himself silent any longer. Hey, Professor Quirrell, stop. Are you really going to help the villain? Can't you see he'll kill you? He never intended to let you live. Quirrell's hand trembled and froze. It's not too late. Turn back. Dumbledore can save you. Think. Ted pushed, every word a shove at the professor's wavering mind. Voldemort snapped back at him. You idiot. What are you waiting for? Don't listen to him. Don't resist me. Get the stone. Ted kept pushing. See, he doesn't even care about your life. He only wants the stone, he added with a bitter little private aside. Unlike me, I only care about other things. Quirrell's forehead beaded with sweat, his eyes darting, his mind overloaded. Voldemort's voice softened, suddenly coaxing. Quirrell, if I have the stone, I can be restored. Then you will be my chief servant. You will not die. The words hit home. Ted's plea had done something, but now Voldemort's promise did too. Quirrell wavered. Was he about to betray his only chance at life? Voldemort sensed the hesitation and seethed. Useless, useless. He no longer had time for nuance. His soul was shredded and weak, fury burned through him. He squeezed Quirrell's magic, overwhelmed whatever leftover will the professor had, and took complete control. Quirrell's hand moved of its own accord, reaching into Neville's pocket. Ah! Quirrell howled with the most terrible scream yet, as if his body were being torn apart. His hand reached into Neville's pocket in a grotesque twist, his limbs shaking uncontrollably, as if in some horrific dance. His face contorted into a knot, his eyes rolled back, and drool ran from his mouth. Voldemort had broken him. With a strange whoosh, two spheres flew straight for Professor Quirrell's head. Empowered by a movement spell, the stone exercise balls could have smashed him outright. Ted had used them for months, casually spinning them in his hands while practicing his magic. He'd spent nearly half a year infusing them with magic and keeping them whirling with psychic energy, tedious and basic, but simple and reliable. Lord Voldemort didn't even turn his head. He made a weird gesture with his hand, and the two balls exploded in midair with sharp pops. "Shh, my balls!" Ted muttered. "Voldemort, you owe me new ones." He didn't have time to grumble. "Arcane missiles!" Ted shouted and sent a second wave of spells. 3 oval projectiles, purple and humming, arced beautifully around the casual shield charm Voldemort had thrown up. Quirrell, already possessed and ragged, muttered a word, and a sickly green magic welled from his tattered body, dissolving 2 of the missiles. The third, though, forced him sideways. He lost his balance and fell. That opening was exactly what Ted needed. While Quirrell flailed, Ted cast magic suppression on Neville. He was taking a gamble. He hadn't learned finite incantatem, so he used what he knew to blunt the petrification. Fortunately, it worked. Neville, who'd been locked stiff for nearly 10 minutes, shook himself free as the suppression counteracted most of Petrificus Totalis. He didn't hesitate. Neville didn't bother with his wand or the little transfigured sword at his side. He drew a fist back and barreled forward. The punch hit Quirrell full in the cheek, the wizened flesh squashed and wrinkled. Then, to everyone's shock, Quirrell's face cracked like porcelain, cracks spidered across it and flaked away in pieces. Neville stared, stunned. He was 12. He hadn't expected such damage from a single blow. Quirrell's first instinct was panic. He touched his face, then found his hand starting to flake too. He screamed, a high, terrified wail. For a moment, his own fear wrested control of his body away from Voldemort. Lord Voldemort's voice hissed from somewhere inside the shuddering body, shrill and frantic. "The Philosopher's Stone! Get the stone! It will save me! Quick, get it!" Hearing that, Quirrell lunged as if at a lifeline. His withered hands clawed at Neville's trouser pocket. The red stone skittered out and hit the floor with a clink. Neville snapped out of his daze and grabbed at Quirrell's wrists, trying to stop him. A grotesque tug-of-war followed, an old, decrepit man against a gangly 12-year-old. It lasted only seconds. Quirrell's wrists began to splinter, fingers cracked off, the shattering ran up his arms. Neville's hands closed on empty air. Quirrell looked at the few remaining stubs of his fingers with a rictus of horror and incredulous delight. Neville, shaking, clawed at Quirrell's face like a terrified animal. Quirrell's face gave way under the assault, more cracks, more flaking. Dust poured out of the fissures. His body collapsed, falling apart into ash within 10 seconds. The sight was awful and instantaneous. Neville crumpled to the floor, panting, eyes wide, his hands trembling. "My hands," he whispered, horrified at what they'd done. "Careful," Ted called, abandoning any pretense of staying invisible. Quirrell's body had gone to powder, but Lord Voldemort's face remained, a pale, floating visage in a wisp of black smoke, and it lunged for Neville. Neville rolled instinctively and snatched up the transfigured short sword at his side, driving it up to stab. Voldemort's face flowed through the blade as if it were mist. Ted had one more trick. He'd hurriedly cast evil protection on Neville, crude, but it could repel truly evil presences. When Voldemort's smoky face hit that ward, it let out a miserable "ow" and was forced back. Without a living host, Lord Voldemort was weak and disoriented. The protection made the contact unbearable and sent the face recoiling. A wisp of black smoke shot toward the wall and then vanished through it. Ted took the chance to cast Appraisal on the floating remnant. He'd already set Voldemort against him. He might as well push it further. 3 days of fighting Quirrell and Voldemort? He could handle that. Remnant Soul, Lord Voldemort, Level 0, Special State. Damn, no useful information had come through. Lord Voldemort had slipped away, and the underground chamber fell suddenly quiet. Even the torches had burned out. All that remained were Neville and Ted, panting, the last wisp of Professor Quirrell's ashes, and the bright red crystalline Philosopher's Stone lying on the floor. The system pinged. Ding! Defeated Dark Wizard, Defense Against the Dark Arts, Professor Quirinus Quirrell, Remnant, Lord Voldemort. Gained 1,500 experience points. Beating Professor Quirrell had yielded more experience than a red-tier quest reward. Ted registered that it might have been reduced because Neville had been the main force. But still, even if Lord Voldemort was only a fragment of himself, he was a fragment of a legendary dark wizard, worthy of the XP. 2 blue cards drifted up from the ashes. 2, Disciples and Masters, loyalty intact even in death, Ted thought with a crooked smile. He walked over slowly, feigning sorrow, scooped Quirrell's ashes into a small pouch and sniffed theatrically. "Oh, poor Professor Quirrell, he shouldn't have believed Voldemort's lies," he said sadly. He took the cards as well. Acting noble while collecting loot was a performance Ted enjoyed. Neville, however, felt a genuine pang of grief. He'd always liked Professor Quirrell. He'd thought him shy and quiet, someone like himself. To discover the man had been the mastermind behind all this was deeply disillusioning. "Quirrell, give me back my innocence," Neville thought miserably. Another system prompt arrived. Ding! Completed quest. Challenging game blue. Reward, 300 experience. Random card. 300 felt a little thin after the 1,500, but it was something. Ted collapsed beside Neville, utterly drained. His stamina and magic reserves were gone. Even trying to recuperate just left him empty. Exhaustion from casting was a hollow, uncomfortable thing. All he'd been able to do in the fight was play support, sustaining from the sidelines while Lord Voldemort focused on the stone. He tried to distract Quirrell verbally. His words had nearly swayed him, but Voldemort's influence had been stronger. Voldemort hadn't even needed to cast many spells to push Ted to the brink. If Voldemort had wanted Ted dead, it might have taken little effort. Had Dumbledore not arrived when he did, Ted might have been forced to use things he hadn't mastered, maybe even a risky teleportation. He'd thought about summoning creatures too, but a troll or an earth golem against Voldemort? That would only stall for seconds and raise questions. Firework dragons and conjured boars could be laughed off as prank items. Summoning monstrous beings would draw scrutiny. Ted did not want Dumbledore or anyone sifting through his secrets. Better to play his part and survive. A few hundred experience points weren't worth burning all his trump cards. "Neville, you okay?" Ted asked, seeing Neville almost collapse. I'm fine, just a little scared," Neville admitted, ashamed to let the fear show. Once the danger had passed, it came back in waves. He slumped against the steps and panted. Don't be afraid. It's over. We did well. Couldn't have done better. We stopped Voldemort and protected the stone. We beat him. Ted crouched in front of the Philosopher's Stone and looked at it closely. He'd had half an eye on Dumbledore the whole time, too. Dumbledore had been hidden in the chamber for more than half an hour, waiting before Voldemort even appeared. The old headmaster hadn't intervened earlier because he'd been watching them, seeing what choices they would make, how they handled pressure. Seeing their performance pleased him. It confirmed that this generation of students was promising. Their excellence also drew his attention to Ted in particular, especially given Voldemort's words about him. Dumbledore was wary of anyone Voldemort valued. Neville looked at Ted and asked, curious, "What are you doing?" Ted produced a pair of second-hand dragonhide gloves from his bag and slipped them on. "Better safe than sorry," he said. He picked up the stone carefully with gloved hands, turning it over, smelling it, though he didn't attempt to taste it. He took a small knife from his pocket and began to try to scrape at the surface. "This is the Philosopher's Stone, the only one in the world," he explained. "I'll see if I can scrape off a bit of powder to study later." The system chimed again. "Ding, completed quest. Can I touch your Philosopher's Stone? Reward, 1,200 experience points, plus Elv1 Alchemy, card, Pseudo-Sorcerer's Stone, red." Ted whooped quietly. "Our headmaster Dumbledore certainly won't mind his dear student scraping off a little powder for research, will he?" he teased. Dumbledore's voice, calm and amused, answered from the shadows. "You keep talking, and I'm listening. I don't mind, if you can actually scrape it off." Neville blinked. "Ted, are you trying to research the elixir of life?" Ted grinned. "Immortality? That's a false promise. Maybe Nicholas Flamel lived a very, very long time by using the stone, but death is everyone's ultimate fate, no exceptions. For me, if I could live 300 years, that would be enough." Neville stared at him. He was too young to have considered such things, and Ted's offhand 300 years sounded extravagant and oddly earnest. But Ted's grin was genuine, and for the first time since the end of the battle, something like laughter broke the tension. Ted noticed Neville staring off, a little lost, and went on. "Magic's amazing. There are plenty of ways to extend your life in the wizarding world. I'm mainly here to see if I can make some breakthroughs in alchemy. Hogwarts doesn't teach that. Besides, you lot need to study hard. I don't want to be putting flowers on your graves 100 years from now." Neville froze. For a moment, a clear image formed in his head, a still young Ted kneeling before a tombstone, placing a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. In an instant, Neville understood one of the obvious benefits of longevity. Ted, meanwhile, had been scraping at the Philosopher's Stone for a while, to no effect. Suddenly, a tiny, teasing voice seemed to come from the stone itself. "Master Ted, stop scraping. It tickles." Ted dropped the stone in frustration. "Damn it! Why is this so hard? Ugh!" Neville caught the Philosopher's Stone as it skidded across the floor, inspected it, and set it down. "I wonder where the professors are, and how are Harry and the others?" "Don't worry," Ted said, trying to reassure him. "This is Hogwarts. As long as Dumbledore's around, they won't be in real danger." At that moment, Dumbledore, who had been watching unseen, felt his face go warm, and with a flourish, stepped toward the door and dispelled his concealment as if he had just come through the fireplace. "Oh my, Neville, Epiphany, are you all right? I hope I'm not too late." "Professor, you arrived at just the right time," Ted replied. This time there had been no ambush by Voldemort, and no one had fainted. Ted and the others were finally brought back up to the surface. There had been a few dangerous moments during the rescue, but in the end, only Ron sprained his ankle. Everyone else was fine. At Dumbledore's insistence, Professors McGonagall and Snape, who had been called by Harry and the others, returned as well. Dumbledore promised to deal with everything. The other professors, knowing Dumbledore had arranged it, didn't press further. They simply told Ted and the others to rest and to report immediately if they felt sick. It was already well into the night, so Dumbledore sent them back to their dormitory to sleep. He didn't even offer to shave a little powder from the Philosopher's Stone for Ted. That old man was impossibly stingy. Exhausted, Ted still wanted to check what he'd gained. First, the 3 cards dropped by the troll. Magic Vision, Nictitating Membrane, blue. Material card, a transparent third eyelid from a specially modified giant troll. It allows the wearer to see the colors of magic. Rare, since only one such modified troll exists. Not extremely valuable, but unusual. Strength card, spell card, grants +1 strength when used. Uses 1/1. Note, ineffective if strength exceeds 20. Troll strength wristband, item card, a wristband braided from troll skin. Equip +1 strength. Note, ineffective if strength exceeds 20. Safe and odorless, equip on the wrist. All three items were troll-related. The first was the translucent nictitating membrane of the alligator-skinned fat troll. An odd material, but being able to perceive magic in color could prove useful. The second card raised strength. Ted would have preferred intelligence or spirit, but trolls don't excel in those, so a strength boost was still welcome. The third item was a wrist-length brown cord, intricately braided and antique in appearance. He tried not to think too closely about what it was made from. It was late, so Ted wasted no time. He used the strength card to gain +1 strength, then slipped on the troll strength wristband. His strength stat jumped to 6. For a 12-year-old, 1.5 meters tall, that made him stronger than the average adult. He also had the card draw from the quest, level-breaking game, blue. The three cards were Gravity Ball, blue, spell card, conjures a gravity ball that deals area damage on impact and temporarily alters the target's gravity direction. Note, consumes a large amount of magic. Fire Release, Great Fireball Jutsu, spell card, expels a massive, explosive fireball from the mouth with concussive force. Note, in martial lore, it's said never to have a confirmed kill, earning it the nickname Benevolent Fireball Jutsu. Crescent Staff, item card, +1 level to spellcasting, +2 intelligence, 2 spirit. Note, staff length 2.1 meters, short users beware. They all looked useful. Ted considered the Great Fireball first and shook his head. A spell that you spit from the mouth was flashy, almost theatrically villainous. Killing someone didn't usually require such a showy display. A well-placed Defindo or Sectum Sempra would do the job. The Crescent Staff tempted him. Its stats were better than his ordinary cedar and phoenix feather wand, but at 2.1 meters it was awkward and conspicuous. He was only 1.56 meters tall in practice. Carrying a towering staff would be inconvenient and impractical for the kind of wand work he needed to do. So he chose the Gravity Ball. The spell name suggested it manipulated gravity, and that could inspire different tactical uses beyond raw damage. Besides, he didn't know much about the game Elden Ring that the effect hinted at, but the magic itself sounded promising. There were also the cards left by Professor Quirrell. Despite everything, the professor had used his final moments to teach Ted and Neville a harsh lesson. Don't trust Voldemort. He'd even left his students his last cards. While others had received only one, Quirrell had given 2. "These are my last cards," Quirrell had said. The first of the 2 blue-framed cards showed rows of glass jars, each holding some creature, and a figure that looked like Quirrell bent over a laboratory bench. Professor Quirrell's Magical Bloodline Modification Research, blue, spell card. Using this grants Professor Quirrell's more than 20 years of knowledge and research into magical creature bloodlines. Effects, +2 level to magical creatures, +2 level to bloodline modification. Uses, 1/1. Note, cannot raise magical creatures or bloodline modification above level 5. Warning, contains dark and bloody content, not recommended for young readers whose values aren't mature. It was a generous, cutting-edge bequest from Quirrell. The card looked like a research module that would be available for purchase the next day, with update timing to be changed. Ted would have to wait until then to access everything. He made a mental note to check it as soon as it became available. 95. Testimonials. It's been 1.5 months since the book was first published, and it's finally going VIP. Thank you to all the readers for your support and love. I've recognized many veteran readers' IDs, including some old friends from my first book, Vientiane Cards. Thank you. I also want to thank my editor, the wonderful Chillin. The recommendations have been non-stop. Thank you for your support and help. I won't say much more. I'll get back to writing. Professor Quirrell was pitiable, actually. If he had been allowed to calm down and settle for a few years, he might have produced some truly fearsome modified creatures. The problem was that Lord Voldemort never gave him a chance. He had never cared about Quirrell's research. When Ted played the second card, Professor Quirrell had exploded across his vision, leaving behind a faceless, noseless head wreathed in black smoke. Was that Lord Voldemort? Why did he look so diminished? The card was labeled Dark Arts Research, blue. Spell card. After use, gain a small fragment of Lord Voldemort's knowledge and research on the dark arts. Plus LV3 Dark Arts. Uses 1/1. Note, cannot raise dark arts above level 6. Note, studying the dark arts is dangerous. Use cards with caution. Even a tiny sliver of Voldemort's research outmatched 20 years of Quirrell's dedicated study. No wonder Voldemort dismissed Quirrell's creations. Ted realized he had been mistaken about Quirrell. Quirrell was, in his own narrow field of bloodline magic and creature modification, a minor genius. The tragedy was the path he chose. Everything that followed had been set in motion years earlier, when a young Quirrell, as a student, found a document about magical bloodlines in a cabinet beside the ugly male wizard statue in a storeroom of the Room of Requirement. That was the spark. Worse, that research had been left there by Lord Voldemort himself before he graduated. So when Quirrell later hit a bottleneck, he took a reckless gamble and went to Albania in search of Voldemort, and the rest, as they said, became a problem. Ted even wondered about the ugly statue's head. Was the Ravenclaw diadem hidden there? No, he told himself. Horcruxes were far beyond what he wanted to touch right now. After using Dark Arts Research Blue, Ted's certainty only grew. That small chunk of Voldemort's notes contained dozens, hundreds of dreadful things. A single slip while studying that material could have destroyed even Voldemort. It was like licking a blade. Horcruxes, he thought, were an altogether more terrifying edge of the dark arts, magic that mutilated the soul itself. Best to leave the diadem, and that subject, alone for now. The 2 cards he'd used shifted his skills drastically. Bloodline modification rose to LV2, magical zoology to LV4, and dark arts to LV5, already matching his magic level without other bonuses. No wonder so many were drawn to the dark arts. The gains could be fast. The memories and experiment logs in those cards were bloody and perverse. Quirrell's studies mostly targeted magical creatures, but Voldemort's notes included experiments on people. Ted felt like he had been watching a human cruelty documentary. If his spirit hadn't been steady, he might not have slept for nights. This path was not for the faint-hearted. Then there was the evening's crowning prize, the reward from the quest. May I touch your philosopher's stone? Red. The experience alone was enormous. He'd earned 1 to 1200 XP from the red quest, 300 from obstacle course game, blue, and 200 from the corridor on the right side of the 3rd floor, right? Green. Add 2500 XP for the 3 trolls, 210 for the Cerberus, and 1500 for Lord Voldemort and Professor Quirrell. In total, it came to nearly 6,000 experience points, more than half a semester's worth in a single night. Murder and arson bring golden belts, he thought with a grim sort of glee. The quest had also granted plus LV1 alchemy, a skill Ted had only read about in books. Hogwarts didn't teach alchemy. He'd heard Nicholas Flamel's homeland, France, and Egypt, one of alchemy's birthplaces, both prized the art. And there was the other reward, a red card that showed a dark red pendant stone tied to a thin string, etched with a blue magical sigil. Pseudo-Philosopher's Stone, red, item card, equip plus LV2 magic, equip plus LV1 alchemy, equip plus 2 constitution, equip plus 2 spirit, greatly increases health and magic recovery speed. Use, can permanently transmute up to 100 grams of base metal into gold each month. Note, this is a high-quality imitation of a true alchemical artifact. Ted's first, very practical thought, I won't be short on money anymore. The pendant also gave plus 2 constitution and plus 2 spirit, 4 points to his core attributes, and LV2 magic. That was powerful. He realized it was an equipable necklace and carefully put it on. Instantly his inner magic exploded outward. The dormitory vibrated as if something enormous had startled. What's happening? Is it an earthquake? Anthony cried. Run! Seeing his roommates about to bolt, Ted hurriedly soothed them. It's nothing, an illusion. You're dreaming. Sleep. Go back to sleep, good babies. He used mind power to calm them and steer them back to rest. Every time his magic level rose, some magical disturbance rippled through the building. Now, with an immediate plus LV2 on top of what he already had, the effect was pronounced. Magic LV5, ++1 from his wand, ++2 from the pseudo-philosopher's stone, V8. A level only the most outstanding heirs of the oldest wizarding families might reach in their prime, a height most witches and wizards would never attain. Ted allowed himself a private, arrogant thought. He'd probably surpassed Lord Voldemort at this point in his first year. Voldemort wouldn't have matched this until much later. Of course, if he removed the necklace and wand, his level would drop back to normal. He still didn't fully understand how the rapid healing worked, but he could feel his magic recovering 10 times faster. It was a tangible, exhilarating sensation. Somewhere in Hogwarts, Dumbledore was studying the traces left by Ted's challenge. The sight of a charred, exploded troll made him thoughtful. He knew of Voldemort's habit of splitting his influence. Was a third Dark Lord being cultivated to divide and conquer? The idea worried him. The next morning, Ted's roommates were still rattled by the night's events. "I had a nightmare last night," Anthony blurted. "What a coincidence, me too," Terry Boot said. "I dreamed there was an earthquake," Michael Corner added. "I dreamed of an earthquake too," Anthony echoed. The three stared at each other, all unnerved. Ted diffused them with a shrug. "You three all had the same dream. Stop fretting and come eat. Food is important." By breakfast, the rumor mill was in full swing. Gryffindors were not by nature quiet. News spread like wildfire in the Great Hall. A crowd gathered around Ted and his friends, eager for inside details. Ron began to transform into Hogwarts resident storyteller. "Do you know?" Ron slapped his thigh theatrically. "This leg's a bit stiff today. You all saw, right? I got it while fighting you-know-who." Jerry speared a piece of cheese. "Wasn't that when you fell and twisted your ankle?" A ripple of laughter and mockery went through the gathering. Ron's face flushed, but he wasn't deterred. "That was also when I fell and twisted my ankle while fighting you-know-who. Want more?" Everyone hurriedly urged him on. Lord Ron's latest episode was clearly the entertainment of the hour. It was Labor Day, and the castle buzzed with its own kind of holiday mischief. Happy Labor Day, Ted thought. There would always be days that fit their kind of celebration. 97. Bragging. Please don't take me. Ron climbed onto a stool, swept back the hem of his wizard robe, looked around with mock disdain, and began to boast. "We found out someone with ill intent was trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone, which Dumbledore had hidden in the castle, and Dumbledore wasn't at school. In that situation, of course we couldn't just sit back and do nothing. We actually thought about it for a long time," he added, lowering his voice for dramatic effect. "After all, even now, the danger still gives me chills." Jerry rolled his eyes. "You mean you thought about it for 3 seconds? You should know the first thing we faced was the extremely dangerous Cerberus. You know, in Muggle stories, that's the beast that guards the gates of the underworld. It could touch the ceiling without even standing up straight." Jerry cut in. "You only learned about the underworld part last night. Anyway, after a fierce battle, we exploited its weakness and defeated it. I can still smell that stench," Ron said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "As for what its weakness was, I can't tell you," Jerry snorted. "Your fierce battle was Ted's rock-hard treacle tart, and lack of sleep was Cerberus's biggest weakness. The second obstacle was Professor Sprout's Devil's Snare. It's endless. It coils around you like a nest of poisonous snakes. For a moment, I thought I was going to be choked to death," he exaggerated theatrically. "And then there were huge and tiny puffball mushrooms, stretching on and on, so there was hardly anywhere to step. They exploded at the slightest touch. We barely escaped with our lives." Jerry deadpanned. "Wasn't that thanks to you, kicking one after another with the precision of someone queuing in the Great Hall at mealtime?" "The third obstacle was Professor Flitwick's enchantment, some kind of ritual I don't fully understand. Hermione and Ted figured it out. I was busy with Jerry and Neville, holding back dozens, maybe hundreds of enchanted statues trying to interfere." Ron waved his hand as if it were no big deal. "Don't include me in your bragging," Jerry muttered. The fourth hurdle was Professor McGonagall's Heavenly and Earthly Trial, the most exhilarating game of wizard's chess I've ever played. I tell you, I was ready to sacrifice myself. At that moment, someone had to give up their life, and that had to be me, the chessman. He looked upward at a 45-degree angle, sadness and pride mingling on his face. In that glow, Ron thought himself radiant and heroic. The younger student's eyes gleamed. Jerry conceded, "All right, this time I'll give you that. You did splendidly." The fifth obstacle was three oddly shaped trolls. The sixth was Snape's riddle and the poison potion, but that was useless. Ted used his own method to break the magic. And finally, Dumbledore's challenge. Neville and Ted reached the final hurdle, and guess who they saw? Ron slammed his fork against his plate for effect. Ted muttered, "This Christmas I'll give him a storytelling clapper. Isn't being a raconteur more promising than being a wizard?" Who was it? Yes, who exactly was it? Is it really you-know-who? No, it can't be. Didn't they say he was dead? Is it one of his followers? A dark wizard, maybe? As Ron told the tale, the hall buzzed with speculation about you-know-who. Ron ignored the chatter. It was Professor Quirrell. There was a collective gasp. You wouldn't have expected that, would you? We didn't either. It turned out to be Professor Quirrell, the one who usually seems the most harmless. He was the mastermind. Ron feigned righteous indignation, like someone betrayed by a cowardly scoundrel. Then he acted out the scene, switching positions and voices. "Quirrell, you didn't expect me to be here, did you?" "Professor, why are you here?" "What do you think?" Ron, mimicking Neville's bluntness, "Guess what Ted said? You're here to take a dump, aren't you?" Ted protested, "He's slandering me. How could I, such a refined and amiable person, say something so crude? I would cast a few proper spells instead." Ron admitted he hadn't actually been present at the final hurdle. Everything he recited was his own embellishment after getting carried away. From then on, taking a dump joke took off around the school. Whenever someone awkward appeared or a situation turned embarrassing, someone would quietly ask, "Are you here to take a dump?" Ron also recalled Ted's botched attempt to scrape powder from the Philosopher's Stone, and despite Ted's furious glares, he told the story of living 300 years is enough. The phrase caught on and became a casual greeting among friends. "I don't want to lay flowers on your grave 100 years from now." Jerry quipped, "I of the rat ear tribe have the shortest lifespan." The narration launched a brief census of lifespans. Rat ear demi-humans lived on average 60 to 70 years. Human wizards commonly reached 80 or 90, and those with strong magic could live past 100. Elves typically began at 300. Dwarves could reach 200. Word of Ted and his friends spread fast. Neville had already gained fame as the savior. Ted made waves during the school song, then caused major incidents on Halloween and Christmas. Rumors circulated about the 6 little wizards fighting 3 monsters at Easter, and now the final year showdown with you-know-who. In short, if the school didn't have Ted and his 5 friends, nothing interesting would happen. First years, second years, even third years would give them knowing looks, as if to say, "Kong Yiji, you've been stealing books again." This was exactly the opposite of Ted's plan to keep a low profile. Plans rarely survive contact with reality, and high risk brings high reward. Ted was now considering whether to raise his mind mage level. Ted also wondered whether Professor Quirrell ever regretted his actions. The Halloween incident with the monster had been absurdly reckless, too odd for someone usually so cautious. It seemed unlikely to be accidental. Quirrell had definitely released the creature on purpose. But why? Maybe Quirrell wanted to force Dumbledore's attention, an act to signal he was abnormal and needed help. Perhaps he had already regretted things, but with Lord Voldemort attached to the back of his head, surrender was impossible. Voldemort could have killed him at any moment. If Quirrell had tried to meet Dumbledore before Voldemort's influence fully took over, Dumbledore might have been able to help. By the time things escalated, it was likely already too late. Ted hadn't expected to receive anything from Quirrell, but he did inherit some papers on magical bloodline transplantation. Quirrell had once asked a student to deliver them to Ted so he could jot down his thoughts. The student procrastinated, and by the time the papers reached Ted, Quirrell was already gone. 3 days after Ted and his friends foiled Voldemort, the Quidditch finals took place. Gryffindor lost to Slytherin again. When Professor McGonagall stepped down, her movements seemed unsteady, and her face clouded with sorrow. Ted felt it was more painful than when half the year failed Transfiguration. Slytherin had been champions for several years, and the repeated defeat was unbearable for her, especially after recalling the match before she graduated, when she'd been knocked unconscious off her broom by a Slytherin foul and her team suffered a crushing loss. This felt like a double blow. Poor Professor McGonagall, who knew how many more years of disappointment she'd have to endure. In this timeline, Neville was the celebrated savior. It was already enough that Neville could hold steady on a broom. He hated flying and would get anxious whenever mounted. He must have a broom phobia. As for Harry, she flew very well, but disliked Quidditch. To her it was boring and effeminate, too dependent on the seeker and too physical. She refused to join the Quidditch team. Ron was furious about Gryffindor's repeated defeats. We lose to Slytherin, then Ravenclaw, then Hufflepuff. We'll run out of teams to lose to. He swore that if he joined the Quidditch team, he would lead them to victory. He promised loudly enough for everyone to hear. Thanks to fellow readers, Tale number 3344 for 500 points, Tale number 1979 for 200 points, and Fat Mountain Lord Who Ate and Drank His Fill and Barber Todd for 100 points each. Thank you to the 4 readers. 98 Old Dunger points. In the second week of June, the final exam results came out. As everyone expected, Ted Epiphany had done brilliantly, first in his year. Hermione Granger was second. Harry Potter's marks were solid, and Jerry and Ron had both done better than anyone had predicted. Even Neville Longbottom was above average overall, and in herbology he was one of only 5 students to earn an outstanding. "Did you see? I got a good too." "Ha ha!" Ron crowed. "If you work harder next year, you'll get an outstanding," Hermione said, rolling her eyes. Jerry, can you believe it? Even copying homework gets you a good. Why bother working so hard?" Ron declared. "That does make sense, Ron," Jerry agreed. After Neville's results were published, Dumbledore asked him to come to the head's office and explained everything. He praised Neville's bravery and told him why Neville's hand had reduced Professor Quirrell to ash. It was an ancient magic, triggered by his mother's sacrifice, a protection that could last until the child reached adulthood, a thing the staff half-jokingly called the Underage Neville Protection Act. Dumbledore also explained why he hadn't tracked Neville down sooner. He hadn't been indifferent, he had been thinking about Neville's situation and about Ted. Dumbledore had been present at the events that led to the prophecy and had been quietly watching the boy who lived. He had expected to have to steer Neville toward courage and destiny, but Neville had already shown many valuable qualities. Much of that, Dumbledore felt, was due to his friends, and, more worryingly, to Ted Epiphany. Ted's influence on Neville was unusually strong. Dumbledore remembered his first close encounter with Ted outside the Room of Requirement at Christmas and had felt at once that this child was different, far more mature than his years. Later observations only reinforced that impression. Ted's talent, his early attempts at inventing spells. It brought to mind someone else Dumbledore had once taken into the school, another bright, strange orphan, Tom Riddle. Tom, too, had been precocious and cruel. Back then, Dumbledore had suppressed him with harsh measures and had later wondered whether different guidance might have prevented what became Lord Voldemort. Now, faced with another gifted orphan, Dumbledore wasn't sure how best to guide him or how to manage Ted's relationship with Neville. Dumbledore also told Neville about the Philosopher's Stone and about Voldemort. "Nicholas Flamel has decided to destroy the stone," he said. "However, if you and your friends are interested, I can introduce you to Mr. Flamel." He warned that Voldemort would likely seek other ways to return, even without the stone. "Our battle is not yet over." Hearing that, Ron's face fell. He instinctively rubbed his ankle, as if the sprain from 2 days earlier still hurt. "No way, he's coming back," he muttered. The last few days of term had been nearly class-free, and the students were hardly restrained. The first years were leaving Hogwarts the next day for the holidays, and there was no homework to take home. On the night before term ended, the castle held a farewell feast in the Great Hall, the end-of-term feast, and the House Cup would be awarded. The hall filled at 5 o'clock, bright and noisy. Friends called to one another, excitement everywhere. Dumbledore rose, tapped his goblet with a fork, and announced, "Students, today is the last day of this school year. I wish you a happy holiday." But before we tuck into our meal, we must present the house cup. The big hourglasses at the entrance told the tale. Ravenclaw had the most sand, 486 points. Many of the points Ted had added earlier had been deducted by Professor Snape, but Hermione, no longer in Gryffindor herself, had contributed heavily to Ravenclaw's total, and those contributions had stuck. Slytherin was close behind with 472 points. Snape had been their steady point provider. Hufflepuff was on 368, and Gryffindor, whose penalties had piled up, lagged at 312. Everyone except the Slytherins was delighted. Snape had presided over 6 straight House Cup victories for Slytherin. For someone to finally unseat them was cause for celebration, even among Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs. Dumbledore smiled at the hourglasses. The results are clear, are they not? However, I think the events of the last few days should also be taken into account. Ted silently cursed. Dumbledore continued. A few nights ago, something very extraordinary occurred. In that event, several students displayed remarkable wisdom, courage, and nobility. Mr. Ted Epiphany, for defeating an unimaginably powerful foe and overcoming incredible obstacles, Ravenclaw is awarded 50 points. Applause thundered through the hall. Word of that night's events had already spread by Ron's telling. In a few days, it had grown into 5 or 6 rival versions of the story. Now, with Dumbledore giving it official acknowledgement, the students erupted again. Hermione Granger, for applying her learning and resourcefulness to complete an incomplete magical ritual, Ravenclaw is awarded 50 points. Another round of enthusiastic applause chased the first. Heads turned toward the pair. Ted thought incredulously, do we really get points too? Neville Longbottom, for facing a terrifying enemy with extraordinary courage and steadfastness, Gryffindor is awarded 50 points. This brought the loudest ovation yet. Gryffindors whistled and cheered like true housemates. Harry Potter, for displaying astonishing bravery and responsibility, Gryffindor is awarded 50 points. The hall erupted in jubilation. And Jerry, who stayed calm and brave in front of the troll and managed to get the key to pass the level, Gryffindor earns 50 points. The cheering continued. Jerry's face flushed as he puffed out his chest and held his head high, his round ears pricked up like a pair of sentries, very pleased with himself. And Ron Weasley, for masterful wizard's chess and his fearless spirit of sacrifice, Gryffindor wins another 50 points. A shriek of delight cut across the hall. It's Ron, my brother, my youngest brother. Oh my goodness, Ron, you're the best, I'm so proud of you. Peggy Weasley, the elder sister, threw herself at him. Ron, who had been basking in his own little triumph and waving to the table, went scarlet and stammered. It wasn't just me. Peggy put an arm around him in mock solemnity. Oh, Ron, you've even learned humility. That's admirable. Ron could only hide his face. The twins, leaning in from the side, chimed in. Our little Ronnie's all grown up. He can earn points for the house now. Okay, I was wrong. Never brag again. Please forgive me. Ron muttered, but Gryffindor had already soared, 200 points in one go, and the whole house set about celebrating as if they might dismantle the hall. Professor McGonagall finally cleared her throat, a tiny, perfectly controlled sound that instantly calmed the chaos. I considered whether or not to assign holiday homework, she began. For a moment, the great hall fell utterly silent, pin-drop quiet, every eye on her. She smiled, and the tension broke. But not this time. A single collective sigh swept the room, stirring napkins and hair. As Dumbledore's voice rose to call the final tally, the glittering sand in the hourglass began to fall. When it stopped, Ravenclaw had won the House Cup with 586 points. Blue streamers and Ravenclaw banners erupted across the hall at a graceful flick of Dumbledore's wand. A system chime sounded in Ted's head. Task completed. We are the champions. Reward, 1,300 experience, +1 intelligence, random card. Ted felt a silly, fierce relief. He had expected Dumbledore to play favorites the way stories sometimes did, slide points toward a chosen hero and crown Gryffindor by fiat, but Dumbledore had been perfectly fair. I do 3 things at Hogwarts, Ted imagined Dumbledore proclaiming to himself. Fairness, fairness, and by Merlin, fairness. He loved it. It was impossible not to grin. Caught up in the mood, Ted pulled out a battered guitar and launched into an extravagant, half-remembered theme song, part heroic anime, part campy rally. His voice was loud and ridiculous, but infectiously so. Soon everyone was clapping and stamping along, some banging plates, others jumping up to sing. Even Professor McGonagall, who normally kept a stern line, found herself smiling and following the rhythm with an arched eyebrow. The official farewell banquet slid into a full-on party. Students came forward to show tricks, songs, and spells until after 9, when the last of the excitement finally ebbed. From the 3-card choice the task had offered, Ted picked a useful one. Promotion, red. Spell card, grants a temporary boost to one of your summoned units. Lasts 10 minutes. Cooldown, 24 hours. Note, occasionally the boost may not be exactly as intended. June mornings started bright and early. Ted heard the excited noise outside his door and gave up on late reading. For once, the whole castle was awake early. Even his roommates were up and buzzing. Michael fussed over his hair in the mirror, determined to look sharp for home. Terry Boot teased him good-naturedly. "Ted, don't you have anything to pack?" Michael asked. Terry cut in, "He's already packed. Ted finished last night, unlike you who's running about like an overexcited puff." Ted shook his head and smiled. He didn't take offense at Terry's comment about family. He wasn't fragile, but he appreciated the thoughtfulness behind it. "I don't have much. 1 suitcase and a backpack are enough. It's all ready." He liked his roommates more than he'd expected. They weren't people he'd shared deep confidences with. Still, day to day, they were decent company. Terry's kindness, in particular, stood out. It was the sort of quiet, reliable goodness that even in old stories turned up on the right side of history. Breakfast was a riot. Without the headmaster and other senior staff in full control, and with the last morning before the holidays upon them, the students were unrestrained. Ron, already sporting the smug glow of his earlier point haul, paraded around with a chicken leg. The Weasley twins made the most of the occasion, hawking their latest self-made wares and shouting a ridiculous slogan. They once fought you-know-who in the Forbidden Forest. Ted and the 6 others all say they're good. The food was swallowed hurriedly and with laughter. Groups of students drifted toward the castle gates in 2s and 3s. The carriages waited by the lake, though those who hadn't learned yet stared around for horses. The real horses weren't visible. The carriages were drawn by thestrals, the pale skeletal winged creatures. Ted, Hermione, and Harry climbed into the same carriage. Before they sat, Ted reached out to touch a thestral on instinct. Thestrals were ugly in the conventional sense. Dry, bony, with a horse-like form and a set of teeth that meant they were not simply decorative. Up close, they looked almost like carved bone, but they were gentle. The one he touched only flicked its head slightly, didn't panic, and let him feel the cool, leathery contour of its flank. Ted wondered if his touch came off kinder because of a little easing spell he'd learned in charm art. Professor Quirrell had been thorough in his teaching about magical creatures. Quirrell had spent years studying and even modifying dozens of creatures. Ted still found himself thinking of the odd paths such study had taken. Why be a magizoologist? Why mix that with dangerous alliances? Questions that didn't need answering now. Hermione and Harry watched him. "What were you touching?" Harry asked, curious. Ted explained, "They're thestrals. You can't see them unless you've seen death and understood what it meant." Hermione tilted her head and looked at him oddly. She didn't press why he could see them. Already her mind leapt to stories of orphanages and hard childhoods, an internal leap many made too quickly. The carriages fell into a silent procession and carried them past the winding road toward Hogsmeade. It was the only all-wizard village in Britain, a bustling little commercial pocket full of shops and pubs, busier than many parts of Diagon Alley on market day. "Look at those funny-shaped houses," Harry cried, eyes shining. "I heard that when we're in 3rd year, we'll be allowed to visit Hogsmeade on weekends. I've never been there." She went on to tell Hermione the usual Hogsmeade trivia, ancient shops, traditions that had lasted for centuries. After walking through the village and circling roughly halfway around the Black Lake, they finally reached the station. The scarlet and black Hogwarts Express waited at the platform. As before, the 6 of them squeezed into a single compartment. Ron patted the inside of his robe where his report card was kept. "I need to ask Mum for a flying broom," he announced. "I want to join the Quidditch team and take Gryffindor to victory over Slytherin." His report card was his confidence. Neville smiled too. His marks had exceeded expectations, but he didn't have any particular wish. He turned to Ted. "Ted, do you have any plans for the holidays?" Ted stroked his chin. "No real plans. I might go back to the orphanage for a bit. I'll probably spend a lot of time in Diagon Alley and at the Leaky Cauldron. I'll still be doing some part-time work there." Jerry's voice was quiet. "Ted, can I work with you in Diagon Alley?" Jerry's family wasn't much better off than Ted's. Now that he was a wizard, he could help raise the family's standing, but not their finances. He wanted to pick up whatever work he could. "Of course," Ted said. "Diagon Alley needs plenty of seasonal help." Hermione glanced at Ted but said nothing. She actually wanted to invite him home as a guest, but she kept it to herself. The train rolled south, swaying gently. Noon came. They opened their lunch parcels, ate, and soon dozed off. Ted closed his eyes and used the lull to tally the changes and gains from the past year. First, the character panel ran through his head. Ted Epiphany level, Wizard 4, Mind Mage 2, Experience, 7,254 attributes, Strength 5, +1 hand rope, Constitution 5, +2 Philosopher's Stone, Agility 4, Intelligence 8, Perceptions and +1 wand, Spirit 12, +2 Philosopher's Stone, Luck unknown. Talents, Otherworld Knowledge, Gold, Study God, Purple. With equipment bonuses counted, Strength 6 and Constitution 7, well above ordinary people. Perception 8 was already impressive. Spirit 14, boosted by the Philosopher's Stone, was stronger than most adult wizards. The last appraisal Ted had of Professor Quirrell put Quirrell's spirit at 9, no matter 3 when possessed. Flitwick and McGonagall hovered around 14 to 15. Snape was probably over 18. Skills, Magic Power level 5, +1 wand, +2 Philosopher's Stone, Magic Resistance level 1, Spellcasting level 3, +1 wand, Mind Power level 3, Mental Resistance level 3, Prophecy level 1, Transfiguration level 2, Potions level 2, +1 Alchemist's Gloves, Herbology level 1, Ancient Runes level 1, Dark Arts level 5, Magical Creatures level 4, Bloodline Modification level 2, Alchemy level 1, +1 Philosopher's Stone. Magic Power was the standout. Ted wasn't boasting when he thought his magic power was unmatched by most excellent wizards he'd seen. The highest magic power he'd encountered was a 6th-year Slytherin, rumored to be the most outstanding scion of the Shafiq family in decades. That student also rated magic power LV6, comparable to the best. Many talented students were at LV4. Peggy Weasley, for instance, a prominent head boy-girl candidate and an outstanding witch, came to mind. The Weasleys looked poor only because of family size. In ability and connections, they were strong. Bill worked as a cursebreaker for Gringotts in Egypt, a post demanding very high spell levels. Charlie raised dragons in Romania. Percy and the twins had their own paths, and the youngest had been Ron's best friend in the original story. The Malfoys, in contrast, were likely to pay dearly if they'd sided with Voldemort, shortcomings that could end a lineage. Looking back at his own list, Ted noted the big gains this year. High magic power and above-average intelligence had made learning magic much easier. Mind power hadn't advanced as much. He hadn't had time to research it, though a backlog of experience ready to be spent waited. Unexpected jumps included dark arts and magical creatures. Thanks to Voldemort's generosity, Ted's dark arts skill had leapt from LV2 to LV5. The details were unsettling to recall. That branch of knowledge would need careful, reverent study later. Alchemy was another surprise. Ted hadn't actively studied it, and yet he'd gained a lot of practical alchemical knowledge. In magic generally, he'd learned nearly 20 standard spells this year, and had developed about 10 more using otherworld knowledge. There were still countless spells he hadn't had time to research, plus otherworld fields like alchemical potions, mind theft, puppetry, spiritual ashes, and complex magical recipes waiting in his notes. Schoolwork hadn't gone away either. Transfiguration, potions. Professor Snape had taught 5 specific recipes that year: pimple-reducing potion, bruise paste, burn healing paste, white essence, and the forgetfulness potion. Ted himself had also brewed minor healing potions, lesser mana potions, and fire protection potions. The more he lived, the more there was to learn, and the more exhausted he felt.